Well, good morning. Can't we dream a little? When we were sitting around talking about our topic for this year's event, we were talking about what was the most asked question over these past 6 months or so, and really autonomous vehicles. And someone said, "Oh, the Jetsons," and we said, "That's great. We'll put that in our video." And everything about that video is really about the future and where we're going. And I guess if it was up to Elon Musk, we might be able to get there in a few years. But the reality is we're maybe 50 or 100 years away, right? But, there's one thing, I don't know if there's one part in that video that's really not about the future. I don't know if anybody saw it, and I can tell you it's happening today. It's when Jane takes George's wallet. I can totally relate to that. That is not the future. That is happening today. But we have a great lineup of speakers for you this morning, and we're really excited. We have Dave Bernard, that's come from Atlanta, really a real leader in autonomous vehicles. Chris Thomas, probably one of the real leaders here in mobility. And we'll go through some other speakers as we go through this morning, but really excited. But first I just wanted to give you a little brief, kind of some of UHY's research at a real kind of 5,000, 10,000 foot level, as Dave and Chris and others will speak deeper on these topics. But, we're at a real time and a crossroads once again. And I feel like we were just talking about this crossroads, coming out of 2009, like which way are we going, how are we going to survive, and now here we are, we're back in that same position, right? And it's critical. It's really critical for Michigan. It's a critical time for our supply base. And I'll tell you why. Because do we remember this time? Remember when the Model T was really the foundation of what built Michigan, right? What built who we are today, the Motor City, the automotive capital of the world, right? Mass production, all the suppliers, everything we developed, right? But will we remember this time? Okay, this is where we are. And I can tell you that the Willow Run, turning that into an autonomous vehicle testing facility, in my mind, is super critical for the future of our supply base and the OEM success too. We got to keep as many suppliers and new suppliers that we haven't even thought of that are non-traditional suppliers in our backyard, in our playground. And this is really important for the future of Michigan. So it's a very critical crossroads. So let's talk about a little bit about what's driving this change, right? And it's really, here's a vehicle of today, right? Ford Mustang. It's got some technology, got some analog gauges, some digital gauges, a lot of stuff. But, what's interesting is the rate of change and the cost of technology decreasing, but becoming a bigger cost of the overall vehicle. Because this vehicle of tomorrow is not that far away, right? Because what are we doing today? We're doing distracted driving. We want to look at our Facebook, and we want to be online, and we want to be productive. We want to do all these things, but we still got to drive. And so this change of driving of vehicles tomorrow is close. This is not that far away, and you can see the interiors of these vehicles are very clean. There's not many buttons. There's not a lot going on, right? Similar to what? The hardware, unfortunately, potentially becomes what? Where can you cut costs, right? It's all about the experience. What we want is what's in this phone. And that's what's a big challenge going into the future. But a tremendous opportunity when you think of retooling the new architecture of all these vehicles. And so Steve McCarty and the team will talk about not only what's happening in the car, but James Stargard is here from Plasan Carbon, the CEO, talk about how materials are totally going to change what vehicles are made of. And that innovation and how that creates value in our multiples, right? So what else is driving change is the experiences, right? Our millennials really want to what? They don't want to spend money on vehicles. They want to go places. They want to do things, right? If they're going to the beach, they want a convertible. If they're going skiing, they want an SUV. So mobility is a big factor here. And Chris will talk about that, right? Urbanization. What do? Over 80% of the population, right, will soon be in urban areas. And what are we doing? We're sitting in traffic, right? How many driving down to Detroit felt like, I'm risking my life? You kind of are, right? But this urbanization is a big factor that we want to be productive while we're potentially sitting in traffic. So that's going to have a big impact. Safety, right? Interesting fact. First time in many, many years, we've had almost an 8% increase in deaths. 38,000, right? Again, driving down to Detroit, I felt like, this number just startles me. If we had this in our airline industries, we'd shut it down. Nobody would be flying, right? But yet we get in our cars and we take that risk every day. And so these are some of the major factors that are really driving this change. And really it's consumers that really want convenience. And so these factors are really what Dave and Chris are really going to talk about this morning. And what's interesting enough, Bill Kohler from Dykema will be talking about is really it's this rate of change. How fast will this happen? Really depends on legislation. Not only in Michigan, can we be a leader? Will it be a foreign country? Is our federal government going to react fast enough? We have one car, Tesla accident, and that's the end of autonomous vehicles. But yet there's 38,000 other deaths. So this change is really going to happen. And I just talked to Dave this morning. So I'm thinking, is this 30 years out? Is this? He goes, oh no, man, this is happening a lot fast. So he's going to talk about it. This rate of change is really happening. So what can our supply base do, really from a high level? I think they're going to fit into really 4 kind of buckets per se, right? And one is, for a successful supplier, I think, is to be a real integrator. And this is one example of, will you be able to do a complete interior design and build, right? And, for certain suppliers, this will be their key to success. And there's other areas also that will be integrators that will be successful. But that's one area that we see for suppliers. Innovator, right? Okay, you look at a Plasson Carbon, right? There's an innovator. Tremendous change. The more we can lightweight vehicles, as Dave pointed out, the heaviest part of a vehicle of tomorrow is going to be that electric battery, right? So how can you make your parts more energy efficient, lighter? All these factors will contribute to being a successful supplier in the future. Relationship. I think this really hits home for a lot of our niche suppliers, right? Where do I fit in, right? And I think really that is that we talk about relationship. It's not about, oh, I know the purchasing agent, I know this guy, I know that lady, I know this person. It's really about, are you the best? Are you the best at what you do? Are you the most efficient? Are you bringing the best cost, speed? Every factor, that creates a great relationship. That really does. And ultimately, this one's not new, but it's something that's just going to be, it's just getting bigger and bigger all the time, right? And it's about being a global supplier. And we've, UHY, with our international network, thank God we have it, because many of our suppliers are going global. And, if you're not, it's going to be a risk for you to really be sustainable just serving one market, potentially, because the OEMs really want that global supply base behind them. And, it's the number of parts that are going into a vehicle will certainly decline. Even, I just read Germany has proposed by 2030 to eliminate the the combustion engine. I mean, tremendous, right? So there's a lot of change going on and a lot of opportunity. And the other factor you have is really our, not only are we competing against global suppliers, we're competing against Silicon Valley. Now, I just read literally on Wednesday, Apple's laying off almost 1,000 people related to their autonomous vehicle. So they're starting to realize that, hey, maybe building a whole vehicle is maybe a little bit big. So that's great for Michigan and our supply base here. So finally, before we get kicked off into our program, I really want to leave you with, how is your company positioned for the future? UHY, we've really prided ourselves as being that trusted advisor to our clients. And yes, the backbone of what we do is providing audit, tax, consulting services. Absolutely. Providing what you need. But most importantly is how do we provide what you want? And that is really the key for us to provide to you to make sure, one thing, to help you grow, right? And we're only as successful as our clients. So if you're a prospect in the room, we hope, feel free to reach out to one of our partners following the program. We'd love to talk to you and find out ways of how we can help you grow. Next, I want to introduce our Michigan Manufacturers Association. We have Brianna Mills, and so what I want to present to you there is that they are our voice of Michigan. They're of our Michigan manufacturers. So if you're not a member, I encourage you to join. Great organization, very, very important to help all of us lead us into the future. So let's welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Well, good morning, everybody. It's so nice to be with you this morning. I'm Brianna Mills from the Michigan Manufacturers Association, and I just want to start out by talking a little bit about who MMA is. So we are the lead trade organization in Michigan representing manufacturers, and our whole mission is to prosper and protect the industry of manufacturing in Michigan. So we are composed of nearly 2,000 member companies, so anywhere from an 8-man tool and die shop all the way up to the big 3. And we encompass all manufacturing, apparel, food, chemical, auto supply, you name it. If you're making something in Michigan, we want to protect it and we want to fight for it. Some of the ways we go about doing this in Lansing is through our advocacy. As part of the government affairs team, there's a lot of regulatory burdens that come down on manufacturing. So that's something that we're working on every week to make sure that we are making this environment competitive and strong for manufacturing. We also speak on behalf of the industry and the court system. We provide educational opportunities, we provide networking opportunities, and we also provide information and partner with great entities like UHY to make sure that our manufacturers are kept up to date and informed for the industry. We also have strategic partnerships across the state. One of the reasons why we're here is because of our partnership in Sterling Heights, so that's very important for us to stay connected throughout the state. And now I'm sure most people in this room, the last word you want to hear right now is election. But we have one going on in Michigan this year. And I handle the political work at the Michigan Manufacturers Association. And so I just wanted to come today to kind of give a little mini update on where we're at right now. So Michigan is ballot proposal crazy. The bad news is we had 12 groups get language approved by the Board of Canvassers this year. The good news is none of them achieved the necessary signatures. 252,000 signatures necessary, and nobody made it. So the reason why this is an issue and why manufacturers have to watch this is we had some scary language get approved. Anything from mandatory paid leave all the way down to a ban on fracking and legalizing marijuana. And there's a lot of different implications for manufacturers in these ballot proposals. I can tell you that 2 of the 12 have already refiled and are working for 2 years from now. So something that MMA will always be keeping a close eye on and protecting the industry. Next, the governor and the Senate are not up this year in Michigan. However, the House is. We currently have a large Republican majority, 62 Republicans, 45 Democrats, and 3 vacant seats. Now, most of the polling and indicators that I have access to show that the maps will hold for the Republicans to retain a 57 to 58 majority. However, if there is a Clinton landslide, all of bets are off. So we could certainly see a flip in the House chamber this year, depending on the outcome of the national election. And finally, I just wanted to talk about the Michigan Supreme Court. There are 2 open seats, two races, 2 candidates, Justice Viviano and Joan Larson. Republicans currently hold a 5-2 majority on the court, so if they are unsuccessful, we will see a shift in power in the Michigan Supreme Court. So these are all things that will impact manufacturers. So with that, I want to turn it over to the rest of our legislative update, to Delaney McKinley. And I love to talk politics. Please get in touch with me if you have any questions or would like to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to try and stay behind the podium because, as I shared earlier this morning, I tend to talk with my hands a lot. And the last speech that I gave, I had lots of notes, and I ended up seeing the pictures, and I was doing this all day. And so I don't think that's a great look. So if I start doing it, somebody remind me and put me back in my place. But as Bree mentioned, my name's Delaney McKinley. I'm Director of Human Resource Policy and Membership Development at the Michigan Manufacturers Association. And I'm part of our dedicated lobbying team. So I don't do the HR work at MMA, but what I do is work in HR law with the legislature and with regulators. So I do healthcare, unemployment, workers' comp, MIOSHA, labor relations, all of talent, all of those types of things. And I'd like to give you a little update this morning on what the state government has in store for manufacturers. First, I'd like to talk about a little bit of good news. And this is going to be no surprise to many of the people in the room today that Michigan is the comeback state. We're hearing a lot about that. I know that some of us have got some political ads that are touting this left and right, but there's lots of evidence to support this. Nearly 500,000 new private sector jobs since 2010. We're first in the Midwest, and we're leading the nation both in job creation and in personal income growth. Unemployment is down to the lowest level it has been in 15 years, and we've been rated number 2 in the nation for economic health. And part of the question is, how did this come about? And I can tell you unequivocally that it is Michigan manufacturing. Manufacturing is driving our economic resurgence, but it is not driving my clicker. I don't know if there it goes. Manufacturing makes up more than 1/5 of our gross state product, and that's nearly $83 billion in output. And to put that in perspective, if Michigan's manufacturing industry, not the entire industry across the nation, but if just Michigan's manufacturing industry were a country, we'd be the 67th largest economy in the world. We employ over 602,000 people in the state, and those are high-wage jobs with excellent benefits. And those are supporting families and communities across our state. So much so that for every dollar that is spent on manufacturing, $1.81 is put back into the the economy, and no other industry has an economic multiplier effect of that magnitude. We have seen billions and billions of dollars in investment from manufacturers of all sizes and types and subsectors, and the growth has been incredible. We are creating more jobs than any other industry in any other state in the nation, almost 150,000 new jobs since 2010. So I can tell you without hesitation, despite what you hear from any major party candidate, Michigan manufacturing is thriving and we are driving the state. And as you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about that. One of my biggest jobs is to be a cheerleader for the industry. And we tell our members that every day. This is a really important job to do, and it's important for you all to do that as well, because you know that there are some major misconceptions. People think the industry's dead, people think that we're dying, that we're dinosaurs. We know that's not true, so we need to be out there telling that story every day. But we also need to be honest and address the elephant in the room. But, you know, it wasn't that long ago that we were shedding jobs. Now we are regaining our position and leading the nation. So what changed? What made that all come about? And we believe a very central component to that comeback and that shift in our industry and in our state is a fundamental shift in Michigan's business climate. Starting in 2011 with a new governor and very strong legislative leaders, we have worked to reform the central underpinnings of Michigan's regulatory environment. And by eliminating these barriers to competitiveness, manufacturers are able to thrive. They're driving the economy forward. They're doing what they do best. And I can give you some specifics on that. First and foremost, many of you are well aware of this, and I hope you all filed for this because you would be surprised. We did our work. It was an extraordinary endeavor to eliminate the industrial personal property tax. And it should result in an annual savings for manufacturers of $576 million each year. But that's only if you file. And you'd be surprised by how many manufacturers we talk to who either say, yeah, I already filed for that, I already did that. No, you didn't. This wasn't available prior to this year. Or, yeah, I think my accountant's got that under control. So make sure that you're taking advantage of this savings. We champion legislation to make sure that manufacturers are paying their fair share of energy rates and not subsidizing other industries, and that results in $100 million each year savings for manufacturers. We fight for hundreds of millions of dollars in state funding that are dedicated to manufacturing training, and we're working to make sure that these are demand-driven programs, that they work for the manufacturers and not for necessarily the educators who think that they know what we want. We know what we want. We know what we need. These programs need to work for us. On the employment and workforce front, this is kind of my little arena here. In 2011, we led a historic effort to modernize and update Michigan's Workers' Comp Act after 30 years of being left to sway with the pendulum of how the courts were made up. And it has resulted in $390 million saved for employers since 2011. There have been several major rounds of reform of Michigan's unemployment system. And this is significant because restraining costs and benefits in this area is important because it's an entirely employer-funded system. A lot of people forget that. You hear that a lot you may hear that from a worker here or there, that, you know, this is my benefits, I paid into this. No, you didn't. This is entirely employer-funded. And it is a huge component of overhead. I think, you know, if you talk to any of your HR people, you look at their budgets, you know that unemployment is a big cost line. So constraining this is important. We'll have more work to do going forward on this as well. We work to preemptively stop local governments from imposing employment mandates on manufacturers and other employers. So you won't have to worry about in your site selection process whether your municipality is going to impose a different minimum wage on you or is going to force you to offer specific benefit packages to your employees. The next couple points that I have all relate to health care. And this is something that I could talk all day about. For those of you who are not aware, Michigan is the only state in the nation who taxes health insurance claims. More often than not, the tax comes on your premium bill. So whoever is paying for the premium, that is who ends up paying this HICA tax. More often than not, that is the employer. And that falls even more so on the manufacturers because, as I said before, these are it's our industry that's offering great jobs with great benefits, and our reward for that is for paying an additional tax on top of that. At first, it's the Health Insurance Claims Assessment Tax, the HICA tax you may hear of. At first, it was put into law in 2011 as a 1% tax on all claims paid. We were able to whittle that down to a 0.75%, and that has resulted in $82 million a year savings. We are working to eliminate that, and I've got a little bit more to say about that coming up. When we're talking about health care costs, every dollar counts. So one of the things we do is we work to keep the few tools that we have left that help us cut costs. And one of them is Michigan has a very strong certificate of need process. And what that does is it helps to constrain the growth of medical facilities and services to make sure that we're also restraining the growth of healthcare costs in Michigan. So we fight to preserve that. We also battle against specific benefit mandate requirements. And, and this is especially important in the day and age of Obamacare, because for every little bitty thing that is added onto your health care bills, that's added costs, and that gets you out of line with your competitors in other states. From a regulatory standpoint, we have been working to eliminate red tape, over 2,000 administrative rules that have been taken off the books. And eliminating these rules is very significant because, I've got some evidence, some studies that were performed by our friends in DC, the Manufacturing Institute. And they found that manufacturers spend, on average, $192 billion each year on regulatory compliance. And they equate that to about an 11% regulatory compliance tax. And, it's questionable, obviously, whether or not these regulations are helpful or support anything. A lot of them just don't make a whole lot of sense. So we work to get those off the books. Slashing and eliminating these regulations, and especially state-specific regulations. Like Michigan used to have, Michigan was the only one in the nation that had this specific mercury rule. We did get that off the books to make sure that you can better compete with your components on the other side of the state line. Beneficial reuse. Manufacturers are saving hundreds of millions of dollars on this, but it's really hard to quantify how much they are saving, because what the legislation did is it allows for the reuse of industrial byproducts. We're talking about things like foundry sand, coal ash, paper mill residuals. Prior to this legislation, manufacturers were paying to put this in a landfill. Now you have the opportunity to either use it, or even better yet, to sell it at a profit. It can be used for things like construction, road building, things like that. So it's hard to quantify exactly how much folks are saving and making off of these products now. At this point, I'd like to kind of refocus a little bit. The whole point of me listing all of these accomplishments is not to just look for a pat on the back from MMA. The point of it is that legislative and regulatory change adds up to billions of dollars back in manufacturers' pockets. And that is, I think I'm preaching to the choir here when I say that that is money that is available to invest and hire and expand and ultimately be able to better compete with the lowest cost jurisdictions all over the world. But we are not resting on our laurels here. There's still much more work to be done. As Bree mentioned, and anybody who has not been living under a rock in the last 2 years, we do have an election in about 2.5 weeks. And I know we're all counting down the minutes to be done with the debates and the ugly ads and all of this kind of stuff. So we got 2.5 weeks, and after that there will be a lame duck session in Michigan. And lame duck sessions are known to be chaotic. They are not known to produce good policy decisions, so we are being very wary about what might move during that lame duck session. And then, of course, as Bree mentioned, that in January we will have a totally new House of Representatives. It remains to be seen the makeup of that. We'll still have the same Senate coming back and the same governor. We believe that manufacturing issues will continue to be on the top of the docket in both the lame duck session and in the new session coming up in January. And I'll just give you kind of a picture of what we're expecting in both of those. First and foremost is energy policy. This has been a huge debate in Lansing, actually for the last year or more. It's been going back and forth. This has really been a really difficult struggle in both chambers. It's not a partisan issue. What we are doing, we are working to make sure that whatever product comes out of the legislature, that it results in reliable and affordable energy for manufacturers. We're working to preserve the 10% choice limit, and we're working to eliminate mandate programs. Rather, we would like to see that the resources stand on their own merits. On the tax policy front, we are currently battling legislation that would fundamentally and historically change how your property is valuated. This last point on this slide I think is particularly important, and I want to put an extra point on it after talking with my new friend from Georgia. I think now that we have eliminated Michigan's industrial personal property tax and we have gotten our business tax rates more in line with the rest of the country, from here on out, it is absolutely critical that we start a meaningful conversation about economic development incentives here in Michigan. We know that other states, particularly our friends in the South, are very active in offering lucrative incentives to manufacturers to come to their states, to create open their doors, expand, do whatever they can. We need to keep up with that. That's a particularly difficult discussion to have with Republican majorities because their first response is that's corporate welfare. But we all know that this is something that is absolutely critical to make sure that we can keep manufacturers and draw manufacturers to the manufacturing state of Michigan. From an environmental standpoint, we are currently in a battle with the administration over remediation regulations that we believe would be incredibly detrimental to the industry. The Snyder administration has said that they are trying to get this done by the end of the year, and so we are working to block those, put the brakes on, so stay tuned on our efforts there. We expect to see, we think we're going to have to make a preemptory move in this area on the environmental front because we're starting to see, and we do believe that we'll continue to see, local governments who are not satisfied with the state environmental regulations. They're going to start doing it on their own. We've seen it in Ann Arbor, we're seeing it in other municipalities, and that is not something that we can't compete in an environment. I've got some interesting statistics. In Michigan, we have 83 different counties, 1,200 townships, 275 cities, 14 planning and development regions, and 300 special districts and authorities, not to mention all of your school districts, your ISDs, all of those things. So you get the point here. Whether you have one facility or you have multiple facilities, having to add more layers, potentially hundreds of layers of additional government regulations is not the way to move forward, is not the way to thrive. So we're going to work to preempt that, cut that off before it gets too far out of the barn. On the healthcare policy front, I talked about HICA a little bit. In fact, today the Senate is slated to send to Governor Snyder a package of legislation that we have authored and we have driven through the process that would eliminate the HICA tax. The governor has said that he has concerns with it. He has not committed to signing it. So I can tell you if he does sign it, if this goes on the books, manufacturers will have $250 million back in their pockets to invest and do all the things that we talked about. But if he doesn't, if he vetoes this, which he has threatened to do, we are back at square one. And again, we are the only state in the nation that has this tax. Your competitors on the other side of the state line do not pay this added tax on your healthcare costs. And no doubt your healthcare costs are skyrocketing, as are everyone in the nation right now. I know many of you are probably, if anybody is involved in your renewal process for your healthcare right now, you're probably already aware of this fact. But pharmaceutical costs are the fastest growing component of healthcare costs today. That is really, when people wonder what's driving our healthcare costs right now, that is really what's driving it. We're looking at drugs that cost tens of thousands of dollars for one treatment, let alone months or years of treatment. In pharmacy drug trends, when you look year over year, 2016 is illustrating a 20% cost increase over previous year's experience. And when you start looking at the FDA and you look at the drugs that are in the pipeline for approval right now, all experts agree that we can only expect these costs to rise exponentially from here on out. So at the same time, while we're looking at these harsh realities of the market and what's being brought to market, there are nationally pushes from organizations representing patient groups who are pushing public policy changes like mandates, forcing coverage to be included in insurance, limiting cost sharing, because of course in the face of all of these costs, we have got to be more innovative in how we spread those costs about. So we share them with our employees, we have innovative benefit design, and there are efforts to undermine that and squelch that innovation. And so ultimately, something that is already unaffordable becomes even more so unaffordable. So we are making sure that we're vigilant against those efforts here in Michigan. And that is something when I mentioned chaos in lame duck, we are expecting some movement on legislation that would relate to pharmaceutical costs in lame duck that could be incredibly costly for us. So we're being vigilant on that. Talent. This is by far the #1 thing when I'm going around the state and I'm talking to manufacturers, I'm talking to our members. This is the first complaint that I hear. 80% of manufacturers report a moderate or severe shortage in qualified applicants. So we're doing what we can to help connect manufacturers with talent, trying to inspire young people. But from a public policy standpoint, what we're really working on is getting additional funding for manufacturing training. And as I mentioned before, that making sure that this training is demand driven. How often do you hear, I'm the government, I'm here to help? We don't need more programs like that, and we don't have time to waste on that. We need to make sure that they're designed and created for the customer, which is the manufacturer. Employment issues will continue to be hot. As Bree mentioned earlier, we will continue to see attempts to force a one-size-fits-all paid leave requirement on all employers. You're going to see it on the ballot. You will see it in the legislature. And the same goes for marijuana, whether it be medical marijuana or full-out legalization of marijuana. And this is a cultural issue that we all deal with and that we're seeing in a number of different states. But for an industrial sector, this has far different implications than if your employees were just running a cash register. I recognize that I just threw out a whole lot of information. I know I tend to talk very quickly, but I want to leave this with you. Okay, so my information is here. I'm always available. You can reach out to me if you've got questions, if you've got suggestions on things that drive you nuts. But if there was one thing that I could really leave you with, it is this. Please go out and proselytize with me. Excuse me, proselytize. Tell people that manufacturing is thriving. Help me be a cheerleader. We are thriving. We are driving this state. We are leading this nation. And much of this is thanks to decisive legislation and regulatory reform. It has removed the impediments and has allowed our industry to do what it does best. I'm reminded of a quote from Pericles, and that is, just because you do not take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. We have to be vigilant in continuing our quest to remove these competitive barriers, and we cannot forget that there are others out there that would undermine our success, whether it's fully intentional from a competitive standpoint or it's well-intended but ill-conceived policy changes. We have to be in the forefront. I welcome you all to that endeavor. My contact information is on the screen. I think there's also information in your packets. I thank you for your time today, and I look forward to working with you all. Thank you very much.
Nice job. That was excellent. Obviously, MMA is very, very critical to all of our manufacturers in the room. Next, we'd like to welcome Bill Kohler. Bill Kohler is a senior counsel at Dykema. Most importantly, Bill is really leading the charge over there for a lot of legislation that's happening in the federal and the state regarding autonomous and connected vehicles. So let's welcome Bill Kohler.
Thank you, Tom. I'm not here to proselytize. I'm here to talk at you. Good morning, everyone. It's really a great honor to be here. And I'd like to start first by presenting our credentials quickly, but really for two reasons. And one is that we're very proud as a firm to already be avidly representing clients on automated vehicle matters. And the second is that by describing to you what we're doing in this space, I can give you a window into the issues and the opportunities that are unfolding in this area. Then I'll move on to talk about the federal regulatory scheme of things relating to this area and the government's new federal automated vehicle policy, which is an important signal as to the government's intention to regulate in this area. And I'll make some comments about timing there per Tom's suggestion. And then after that, I'll cover Michigan's proposed autonomous vehicle legislation, which would be a huge leap forward for Michigan. So firstly, this guy, right, without a beard. I'm just a little bit by way of background, actually fourth generation automotive, and very proud of that, with great grandfathers and grandfathers on the plant floor making axles and things like that, and one grandfather who was a draftsman, cast tech educated, and then involved in developing the front-wheel drive transmission for the Tornado in the early 60s. And so we're an auto family, and I carry on that tradition with great spirit and with a lot of interest in the evolution of the automotive industry, and what I believe at this stage is the cusp of a revolution. I really think that in 10, 20, 30 years, as Tom suggested earlier, we're going to be looking back at this era like people look today back at the era of the Model T and that Greenfield Village. So I've spent my career in automotive, first with Chrysler and then as automotive general counsel for Johnson Controls, chief legal officer for Dura Automotive, and now in private practice with Dykema. And during the course of my career, I've taken special interest in the industry's developing financial and commercial scenarios. And so in 2004, I began advising and writing about the automotive bankruptcies that then took place in 2008. And around that time, I was advising Tesla and Coda Automotive, if you remember that company, on some of their startup risk mitigation issues. And then a few years ago, I began analyzing the potential legal and regulatory issues regarding autonomous and connected vehicles, and that led to publication last year of a law review article which is called Current Law and Potential Legal Issues Pertaining to Automated, Autonomous, and Connected Vehicles. And in writing that, and it's about 50 pages long with 280 footnotes, I wanted to lay a foundation for what's happening today and what might happen in the future, so that down the road, 10, 20, 30 years or so down the road, people might look back and say, this is how they were thinking about this at the time. So my colleagues have also published and spoken on a variety of advanced vehicle technology topics, including the article depicted on the right here regarding legal issues pertaining to artificial intelligence, and also they've written on connectivity, data privacy, and technology topics. To get into what we're doing as a firm, but not to make this about the firm, to make it about what's happening with respect to issues and opportunities in this area, we're advising car makers, suppliers, insurance companies, technology providers, and investors on a variety of matters already. We're assisting clients with investments in technology providers, technology development arrangements, and other types of transactions. Excuse me. We're counseling on product liability issues, including advice beginning several years ago to the Connected Vehicle Trade Association, which is the consortium of car makers and suppliers dedicated to advancing bidirectional vehicle communications, or V2V communications, which we're hearing a lot about these days. Legislative and regulatory developments and compliance, including the federal policy that I'll cover, and Michigan's pending automotive vehicle legislation, autonomous vehicle legislation, which I'll also cover. And then supply chain risk management, including the risk of technology providers' bankruptcies and the contractual allocation of liability resulting from technology defects. This is a particularly interesting area given the stark contrast in how these types of things are handled contractually, as between Detroit car makers on the one hand and Silicon Valley tech companies on the other. And we're learning about that. Cybersecurity is a big unfolding area where we soon expect some federal policy developments, probably a policy announcement by the end of this year by the federal government, or at least by next spring. As more and more information is broadcast and retained by vehicles, data privacy is a growing field, so we advise clients on privacy obligations, including cross-border transfer requirements, privacy programs, and standard contractual clauses. And beginning in the mid-1990s, so 20 years ago, we began representing VIIC, which is another consortium of global automotive manufacturers that came together to perform various preliminary assessments as to the feasibility of connected vehicle systems, along with the U.S. Department of Commerce. And then finally, we're assisting insurance providers as they plan for the implications, issues, and opportunities that will arise as automated vehicles are deployed. And this is a critical area because insurers will have the last word on whether highly automated vehicles hit the road, and because vehicles and vehicle systems won't be deployed unless they're insurable. And finally, we're thought leaders involved in liability issues and regulatory schemes relating to artificial intelligence. Am I on track here with my slides? Okay, I can't see them. So now for the meat of the matter, I want to start with a quick overview of how the federal safety regulatory scheme operates to lay a foundation for the federal policy discussion. The Department of Transportation oversees NHTSA, which is the National Highway Transportation and Safety Administration, and that was established in 1970. NHTSA's job is to maximize highway safety, and its mission statement says to save lives, prevent injuries, and reduce economic costs due to road traffic crashes. Tom cited some statistics which are really very serious. 38,000 people were killed on U.S. roads in 2015. Roughly 4.4 million people were injured the same year, and that, as he said, is an 8% increase from 2014, but compared with less than 0.5% increase between 2013 and 2014, and a 3% drop the prior year. All in all, that jump was the largest in fatalities and injuries in the last 50 years. So these statistics and the recall incidents, like the ignition switch situation and the Takata airbag situation that have been so controversial in the news over the past few years, mean that NHTSA is under a great deal of pressure to live up to its mission and is much interested in accelerating the deployment of safety-centric technology as it is in ensuring that the technology is safe when it's deployed. So I think that things will move fairly quickly here, but not without, not too fast as to run us into trouble. I'll say more on that in a minute. NHTSA has several powers. One is to establish vehicle safety standards for new motor vehicles, not for ones that are already on the road. But car makers self-certify their compliance with safety standards. So NHTSA doesn't currently operate like the FDA, which of course has to approve medications before they're sent to market. And as you know, that's typically a time-consuming process. NHTSA, as you know, can also require recalls of vehicles that don't comply with its standards or that NHTSA determines to have a safety defect. In 2013, so just 3 years ago, NHTSA announced its interest in regulating autonomous vehicles and its interest in supporting the adoption of autonomous vehicle technology. Where NHTSA regulates, the states may not regulate. So in lawyers' terms, NHTSA's regulations regarding automated vehicles would preempt contrary state regulation. This means that states can issue supplemental regulations when they're not in conflict with NHTSA's safety standards, and it leaves to the states the power to regulate vehicle use, different than vehicle standards, involving things like operator licensing, operator restrictions, safety inspections, and vehicle registration, as well as the allocation of liability. So briefly, for those in the audience involved in the commercial freight industry, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Association has power over your industry, and unlike NHTSA and passenger vehicles, the association can regulate the operation of vehicles through commercial driver regulations, and it does that with respect to hours of operation, substance abuse, cell phone usage, and video display prohibitions. Skip that. And that. So moving to recent important developments, NHTSA issued its federal automated vehicles policy just last month. and it pertains to both highly automated vehicles and lesser automated vehicles in a way that I'll explain in a moment. The policy was issued as guidance rather than as regulations, but it'll have a tremendous influence over the automotive industry going forward because of the risks to car makers' relationships with NHTSA if they don't work hard to comply with it. In the policy, NHTSA makes it resoundingly clear that it will investigate any hint of safety concern associated with highly automated vehicles, and it will exercise its enforcement authority to the fullest extent. So NHTSA is signaling that it will serve as a guard dog as technology and its commercialization advances, while at the same time it's saying that it wants to be supportive of the deployment of new technology and to accelerate that deployment. NHTSA also makes clear that it will treat software in vehicles as motor vehicle equipment subject to its regulation, and that it will issue further guidance as to whether external software outside of vehicles that connects to and operates vehicle systems will be considered within its jurisdiction for regulation. The policy is, if you're interested, subject to stakeholder comment until November 22nd, and many, including the Motor Equipment Manufacturers Association and the car makers through their association, are working on that. One of the most important aspects of NHTSA's request, of the policy rather, is NHTSA's request for voluntary safety assessments for highly automated vehicles with respect to each of these 15 elements. And I won't read this list, but to cite a few things: data recording and sharing, privacy, system safety, cybersecurity, crashworthiness, post-crash behavior, ethical considerations, fallback to minimal risk conditions in the event of a hazard, what decision does the car make to place itself in the minimum amount of risk, and then validation methods. But it goes further than that in requesting safety assessments with respect to lesser automated vehicles, specifically those at SAE levels 2 or higher. Now, let me explain what that means. This is the automation scale that NHTSA now uses, replacing one that it had earlier announced and adopted. This one was developed by a committee at SAE over the past few years, the Society for Automotive Engineers. Level 0 is today's version of the horse and buggy level, where the human driver does everything. And at level 5, the other end of the spectrum, the automated system can perform all driving tasks under all conditions that a human driver could perform them. So that's true vehicle autonomy. At level 2, which is the level at which NHTSA now begins to request safety assessments, the automated system can conduct some parts of the driving task while the human continues to monitor the driving environment and performs the rest of the driving task. So this, or level 3, one notch up, sounds like Tesla's autopilot system, but it could even include parking assist and relatively simple things like that then would be subject to safety assessments. NHTSA has requested safety assessments on a voluntary basis, but it's really unimaginable that car makers won't submit them. And in fact, NHTSA has requested their submission within 4 months for vehicles that are already tested and deployed, and in the future, they want the safety assessments 4 months before deployment. In addition, NHTSA has identified 4 additional powers that it may seek for itself through act of Congress by amendment to the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. One is the pre-deployment approval process, or pre-market approval, such that NHTSA would in fact serve as a market gatekeeper like the FDA does with medicine. This would be a radical departure from NHTSA's self-certification scheme of safety standards. It would put NHTSA into the business of determining whether and when vehicle technologies can hit the road. And to say a few things about timing here, what I think is going to happen is that the car makers will do everything in their power to provide meaningful and comprehensive safety assessments, and that NHTSA will do everything on a voluntary basis, and that NHTSA will do everything in its power to promptly respond to those submissions. And I think that in so doing, the car makers may avoid the FDA-styled pre-approval process and that if we did see a pre-market approval process implemented by NHTSA through act of Congress, then that could significantly delay the advancement of deployment of technology. Another power that it may seek is the cease and desist power to use in case of new technology-related imminent hazard. And this would have the effect of strengthening NHTSA's position to act if a hazard is merely suspected. So the policy acknowledges the respective federal and state responsibilities that I described earlier, and it recommends a model regulatory framework for states that wish to regulate procedures and conditions for testing, deployment, and operations of highly automated vehicles. The model state policy recommends that states require that manufacturers submit to a designated state agency an application for testing that the highly automated vehicle follows the policy's 15 elements of guidance that I mentioned earlier. So it's beginning to work the NHTSA elements of guidance into the state level scheme of things, or it would if to the extent that that is adopted by any state. The policy also recommends certain other requirements, such as testing only by trained persons designated by a manufacturer and reporting of all crash incidents to the state. And then the policy also recommends, the model state policy also recommends that states establish a multi-jurisdictional automated safety technology committee that comprised of representatives, the kinds of representatives listed in this slide. And in fact, the Michigan legislation that I'm going to get into right now contemplates such an advisory council to the governor. You can find the full policy at that link. And then moving on to Michigan's proposed autonomous vehicle legislation, I'll briefly cover this pending legislation, which was approved by the Michigan Senate on September 7th, and which, as I said, is generally in keeping with the new federal policy recommendations. So the legislation is comprised of 4 bills, Bills 995, 996, 997, and 998. And most significantly, the bills in one sweeping statement would permit driverless vehicles on Michigan roads generally, without conditions and without bureaucratic entanglements, though subject to the federal safety requirements and, of course, manufacturers' due consideration for liability concerns and for the insurability of vehicles. The bills are currently in the House of Representatives, awaiting a floor vote with some modifications. One change is that the House is considering would permit the deployment of autonomous vehicles not only by traditional car makers, but by other manufacturers with a record of more than 1 million miles on the road. And so this really would bring into the fold, if it's included in the final version, the Googles of the world, beyond where the limitation in the Senate bill, which would limit the opportunity basically to the traditional car makers. So once the bills are enacted, and it's fair to assume that they will be, then Michigan will have taken an historic leap forward toward the deployment of autonomous vehicles. And it will ensure its place as one of the world's epicenters in this new technology. And it will also have provided a legislative template for other states to follow, which is important because a conflicting patchwork quilt of state legislation in this area can only complicate things and hinder the advancement of the deployment of this technology. So the allowance for the deployment of autonomous vehicles appears, as I said, in Bill 995, and that bill also provides for the deployment of platoons of electronically coordinated vehicles traveling in a unified manner. And this development is first expected to be seen in the commercial freight sector so that trucks can group in caravans to create fuel savings by drafting, just like cyclists. Just out of curiosity, do we have anybody in the audience from the commercial freight industry? Okay, talking to you then. So different than the deployment of individual autonomous vehicles without bureaucratic involvement, platoons would be permitted only if a plan is submitted to the Department of Transportation and to the state police, and if that plan isn't rejected within a 30-day period. But there's no statement made in the legislation as to requirements that would be considered by those agencies of our government. And commercial vehicles in platoons would have to have a driver present behind the wheel, so they may not actually be driverless, reflecting, I think, the fact that commercial vehicles need to exit and enter freeways, or platoons rather, depending upon their individual routes. And so sometimes, frequently probably, they will need to have drivers. And then of course you have at the shipping end of transport the need for driver involvement in managing cargo in that. So quickly here, I'd like to highlight some other features of the other bills. Those are bills 996, 997, and 998. 996 permits, and I think this is interesting, vehicle manufacturers to deploy so-called SAVE projects, which are on-demand automated motor vehicle networks within certain types of geographic areas, including municipal and regional authority areas, university campuses, and senior citizen developments in similar areas. Notably, non-manufacturers may not participate in SAVE projects, and manufacturers may only participate in SAVE projects so long as their vehicles are equipped with automated driving systems, crash notification technology, and a data recording system. And so these requirements pertain only to SAVE projects, and I think it's an indication of the probability that SAVE projects will be early deployed in specific areas and then provide an opportunity for things like data gathering, early data gathering, which would be useful to advancing the overall cause here. 997 excludes roads that are within a mobility research center from the vehicle code provisions in our state law that are normally applicable to private roads that are open to the general public. And this provision makes possible the American Center for Mobility at Old Willow Run Airport, which will be the 335-acre mobility testing site that I'm sure you've heard about and that is under development as we speak. Nearing the end of my presentation here, I want to make just a few comments about insurance and liability and then a couple extra words. The insurance and liability provisions of bill appear in bills 995, 996, and 997. And just by way of background, liability in the autonomous vehicle realm is a big topic of discussion and speculation. And Michigan's legislation begins to address some of those issues, but certainly not all of them. And to the extent that it doesn't, it leaves us with general product liability principles at play. And as to insurance, the insurability of driverless vehicles is hugely important, as I mentioned, because insurers will really have the last word as to whether autonomous vehicles hit the road, whether they can be deployed. But the Michigan legislation is very light on insurance provisions, leaving a lot for the market to determine. So having said that, there is the $10 million insurance requirement for new manufacturers, which I mentioned. And with respect to liability, bills 995 and 997, both for some reason, I don't know why, provide that the automated driving system, when engaged in allowing for operation without a human operator, is considered the driver or operator of the vehicle for purposes of determining conformance to any applicable traffic or motor vehicle laws. Now this is key because it's saying passengers in driverless vehicles are not liable for violations of traffic and motor vehicle laws. But that isn't saying that anything about the allocation of liability with respect to product liability. Am I good for time? Okay, I'm getting a signal here. So I'm going to cap this off just by saying that two things really. The federal government is really interested in advancing the cause here, but also really interested in making sure that it's done on a very safe basis. That could, but I think probably will not lead to an FDA-style pre-market approval process. Michigan is equally interested in advancing the cause, and it's going to do that through its new legislation, which I feel confident is going to be passed. That's an important economic development move for the state because it will position it, as I said, at the epicenter or one of the epicenters for this new technology. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. I think the bottom line is tread lightly, tread carefully. You're probably going to get sued, and you're going to have to call Bill. So, I don't know what to tell you there. So a lot of laws, a lot of things that are going to come into play. Next up, we're very fortunate to have David Sowerby, just one of the most well-known and respected investment advisors and economists here in Michigan. So David comes with over 31 years of investment experience with Loma Sales. He's had a variety of senior positions, but most importantly, David has served 10 years as chairman as the Investment Advisory Committee for the state of Michigan's $50 billion pension fund. He was recently appointed by the governor to serve as the director of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So let's welcome David Sowerby. Obviously, this is really important. Obviously, all this autonomous vehicle stuff is really predicated on us having a great economy and to be able to build upon. Thank you.
Okay, I think, I know I was here a year ago, and I tried to build the case of what's been dubbed a modest or better than modest manufacturing renaissance, which is taking place in this state and in this country. I think in the next 15 to 20 minutes, if I serve my time well, I'm going to build the case that from a cyclical perspective, we have, in baseball terms, we're in about the top of the 7th inning for this business cycle with some legs left in it. From a secular or structural perspective, the message, I think, is actually more positive, that there's more good news taking place in manufacturing than sometimes the slow-footed media will give it credit for. And I can say more specifically as a former economist, but more importantly, somebody who actually gets to touch the money and put it to work, that from that perspective, when you look at the opportunities, whether it's in autos over the longer term, the industrial sector, there's a more rich environment to be an investor today than to simply talk about it, but to actually put it to work in perspective. So first, the cyclical perspective. I said in baseball terms, about top of the 7th inning. We have not, nor will we ever, solve the business cycle. We will have recessions. Manufacturing will take its bumps and its bruises, as it often does in a recession. We know that quite well and painfully from whether it's from a national perspective or from a global perspective, that this cycle has not been as robust as past business cycles, but nevertheless, we've had more than 70 years of growth, and I think the cycle still has legs left in it. Manufacturing becomes a more, I think, robust view within this cyclical business cycle, especially when I drill down and I talk more importantly about what's going on in the state of Michigan. Probability of a recession today, in round numbers, is somewhere between 25, maybe as high as 30%. In the next 2 years, and again, as a former economist, an economist like to give you 100 charts when maybe 2 charts will tell you the correct story. If I had to watch just 2 variables on the business cycle, most important on a forward basis, I'd watch the difference between short and long-term interest rates. And to be more precise, I'd watch the difference between the 10-year Treasury and the federal funds rate. And when that goes flat to inverted, that is when Fed funds are trading above the 10-year Treasury, it's time to, in manufacturing terms, circle the wagons and get very sensible on inventory control. I'd balance that off with, from a first business day of every month, you get the U.S. Manufacturing ISM Manufacturing Index. You also get one for the Detroit area. And to me, that's the #1 coincident cyclical indicator to watch. The rest may be interesting, but more than anything else is purely noise. So from a cyclical perspective, a couple years at least left in this cycle, and one where I think manufacturing has the potential to do quite well. Let's talk more importantly about the secular prospects for manufacturing and drill down more to what's important in the state of Michigan and Metro Detroit. So by now, I think my handouts have made their way around the room, and in the next 10 minutes, I'll run through these and give you the case that from a secular or structural perspective, the message I gave last year was, I thought, mildly robust. I think the case for manufacturing is even more compelling today. First, to the state. Now, it's not original at all, but I just take job growth and income growth, and I combine them, and I call them prosperity. No better measure to measure the health of Michigan's economy than just to combine job growth and per capita personal income growth. And if you look over the last 25 years, you'll see three distinct patterns within the state of Michigan. The first from the early 90s to around 2000, 2001. Let's call the party pretty darn good in the state of Michigan. When Michigan's unemployment rate went below the U.S. in 1993, and it bottomed at about 3.2% around 2000, 2001. And the tailwinds for business, I think, in Michigan and manufacturing were quite well. Wealth was being generated thanks to a pretty good stock market. The state business climate was modestly improving. There were macro tailwinds. Motor vehicle sales were growing, particularly in the light truck segment. And Michigan witnessed a pretty good party up until about 2000, 2001. Then unfortunately, if you look at prosperity between the U.S. and Michigan, we go through a lost 8 to 9 year period where the party never happened, but we sure had the hangover when the Great Recession started in 08, 09. Segue into the last 6 to 7 years, and 90% of the time, in the last 6 to 7 years, Michigan's prosperity has been growing faster than it has been at the national level. Usually by this stage of a business cycle, in my overused baseball top of the 7th inning example, we would be lagging. Yet today, we are not. Our unemployment rate, believe it or not, has gone from 14% to about 4.5% in change. No state has improved as much as the state of Michigan has. Unemployment rate's an easy number to watch, but too often it doesn't tell the entire story. Job and income growth is, to me, a much more compelling figure, and we can see that Michigan has continued to fare quite well versus the U.S. Just in the last couple weeks, every fall, the Tax Foundation comes out with their survey of state business climates. Now, no state has done as well as the state of Michigan has in improvement in state business climate. It was a below-median state 8 years ago, and in the last one that came out in late September 2016, Michigan actually moved up from number 13 to number 12. We're ahead of, believe it or not, in state business climate by, I think, the most comprehensive, rigorous measure of business ability to do business and flourish in a state. Michigan at number 12 is, believe it or not, ahead of the state of Texas, which is number 14. Some of our Midwest siblings, Ohio, number 45, Illinois, number 23, but moving in the right direction. Indiana, still the bellwether at number 8, Wisconsin, number 39, Minnesota in the 40s. Where Michigan continues to, I think, fare well in a state business climate that begins to set the table for manufacturing, not just nationally, but if you transcend it to the state, continue to do well, is our corporate income taxes used to always be 48, 49 in competitiveness. Our corporate income taxes now are number 8 in this country. Personal income taxes, number 14. Sales taxes ranked number 9. Property taxes ranked number 25. So you can see on most business measures, with the exception of unemployment insurance, the state from a secular perspective, by setting the right seeds, I think has the ability to continue to grow. And where if you quickly look on page 3, and I promise I won't run through all of the numbers, but when I do a like-on-like comparison of Michigan versus the U.S., you'll see that we are outperforming. Stock prices, corporate profit growth, the return on equity for roughly the 80 Michigan headquartered publicly traded companies that I monitor, lower unemployment rate, housing prices faster, ISM manufacturing index, what I said was one of the one or two go-to numbers to try to watch every month, prosperity doing better, and the case is quite compelling for Michigan from a cyclical that's transcending into better secular growth. So when you line it all up and you look at manufacturing and you just try to take a simple balance sheet approach and you think about assets and liabilities, it's about a 2-to-1 ratio or better of assets to liabilities for the case for manufacturing in the state and within this country. I won't go through all of them again, but I promise. Labor costs are much more competitive in this country vis-a-vis some of our competitors globally. Energy independence. You're going to talk a lot about technology advances today. Strong dollar may have been a challenge for many manufacturers to sell abroad, but now the dollar is stabilized and even is retreating, commensurate with its longer-term secular decline, which began in September of 1985. Low cost of capital continues to help manufacturing. That is low inflation, low borrowing costs. Less, I think, discussed is that the consumer in this country is in better shape than people realize. I'm a big believer in valuing a company on its free cash flow. There's no silver bullet, but if there is, that's probably it. But if you take that and apply it to the U.S. consumer and look at U.S. consumer free cash flow, it's surprisingly robust, which helps out manufacturing and ultimately continues to help out motor vehicle sales. I went on pretty detailed on the state business climate. At number 12, we compete. China manufacturing costs continue to go higher, and assets are quite compelling. There are always going to be liabilities. There's nothing revolutionary to talk about that the regulatory environment or the regulatory pendulum continues to swing in the wrong direction. All you have to do is watch conversations like last night's debate to know that it's unlikely to move back the way it went in the correct direction in the late Carter years and the early Reagan years. There's certainly more federal uncertainty when it comes to taxation at the federal level, much less so at the state level. That is unlikely to move in the right direction. Ask any CFO and they'll tell you, especially at the small business side, it's the uncertainty over taxes and regulation that compels people to keep more than a normal amount of cash on the sidelines. A little bit of the tire tracks on your back from the Great Recession in 2008. But I think the tax and the regulatory environment continues to be a hindrance. It quite reminds me of the two favorite quotes when it comes to this. I think the first one goes to Goldwater that says, a government that's big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take it all away. Last night's conversation, I think, demonstrated that more. Or my favorite one, the free markets are great. They create winners and losers. But as one person observed, winners don't complain, losers have Congress. And in this type of environment, I think those are the liabilities that I see or the challenges for manufacturing. So if we quickly run through the next series of pages, not to get too chart happy, but you'll see that capital expenditures from manufacturing with respect to structures off the trough in 2011 is up a strong 89%. That's quite compelling. If you look further into autos on the next page, on page 6, the number of new plants, facilities in the auto sector have outpaced all other industries within manufacturing from 2012 to the present, now running on 4 years. Manufacturing construction spending as of mid-year is about $12 billion. It's up from $4 billion 3 short years ago. And what's been dubbed the last 4 or 5 quarters as a mini U.S. profit decline or recession, manufacturing has continued to hold up, and I'll show you in a minute why it's held up well for cash flow in particular. Continuing on quite quickly to wrap it up, on page 7, coincident indicators. If you look at manufacturing states, obviously of which Michigan is one, Manufacturing states have outpaced non-manufacturing states since the trough in 2010. And again, usually by this stage of the cycle, they'd be lagging or rolling over, yet they haven't. And if I look at some of those top 10 states, not surprisingly, what correlates with them? A more competitive business environment. Indiana ranked number 8, Michigan number 12, North Carolina's should be the next state on our bullseye for competitiveness. Michigan's ranked 12th, North Carolina's ranked number 11, Tennessee's ranked number 13. Just to run through a few of these manufacturing-oriented states that are more competitive and I think allows them to grow when other states may not, who are not competitive when it comes to their tax climate. You can't talk about manufacturing without talking about autos, and the last couple of pages speak to my important metric, and that's cash flow from operations and free cash flow. One of the stories that Wall Street has been a little slow to catch up to, but now I think is embracing it more, is the better deployment of capital, the better capital discipline that's existed within the auto industry. If you look at Ford and General Motors and look at 5-year increments of their cash flow from operations, it is decidedly moving in the correct direction. That well-read book by Thorndike called The Outsiders, not the one we read in middle school, not the S.E. Hinton Outsiders with Pony Boy, but the one by Thorndike that talks about 10 great CEOs who are terrific allocators of capital, like Harry Singleton at Teradyne. The auto companies are much better at allocating capital today instead of some of the silly acquisitions they did in past decades. It shows up in Ford and General Motors. And finally, on page 9, when you look at the operating cash flow of a sample of 10 or so suppliers, you'll see the decided improvement off the 2009 trough in operating cash flow. And the number only is expected to get better over the next 12 months. 30% growth in the last 2 years in operating cash flow. And that comes in an environment where U.S. corporate profits have been flat to down in the last 5 or so quarters. It's only in this quarter that companies are beginning to report for the just completed third quarter that you're seeing the incremental gain in net income move in the right direction. But I think the autos have continued to demonstrate that they're better generators of cash flow, they're better stewards of capital. And when I sum it all up and I think about, yeah, we haven't solved the business cycle, recessions will happen. Best you can figure for a former economist who is a full-time portfolio manager, it's probably about 2 years out. I gave you my couple of variables to watch. But more importantly, when I look at the secular story, and I try to be as unbiased as I can, and I look at assets and liabilities of the autos and manufacturing in Michigan, it's about a 2 or better to 1 ratio for what I think assets are relative to liabilities. And why, as an investment firm, we own lots of the equity, and we actually own even more of the debt. Names like Ford, GM, Delphi, Borg Warner, Visteon, you name it. When at this stage of the business cycle, asset managers or Wall Street's usually taught you date the autos, you don't marry them. You own them for the first couple of years of the expansion, and then you move on. But 7 years into this expansion, we continue to see merit in the equity, but even more so in the debt because of the generation of cash flow from ops and free cash flow. So my message was to keep you on track. It's 9:24. I think somebody's up at 9:25. So in the spirit of nobody boos you for a short speech, I'll stop. I won't take questions because we want to keep UHY on this schedule. And thanks always for the chance to come here and talk to you today.
Thank you. Thank you, David. You know, that's why we always invite him back. He always has some great perspectives and also some good news. So once he brings negative news, we won't invite him back anymore. So next up, just before our break, Scott Earls is going to present on the R&D credit. You're kind of thinking, well, how does this fit in today's agenda? Well, really, you know, with autonomous vehicles and the amount of change, and if vehicles inside the car and outside. There's just a lot of R&D going on. And it is one area that the federal government, as Scott will go over, has really changed and made some very beneficial changes for our small and medium-sized manufacturing companies. So Scott has nearly 30 years of experience with UHY. He's a partner in providing tax planning and strategic business consulting services to a wide range of privately held and also publicly held companies. He's a leader in our tax department and a member of our firm's tax accounting methods and periods committee. I actually don't know what that means, but we'll ask Scott on that one. So let's welcome Scott. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. The last time I did this presentation, it was actually about 90 minutes allocated to it. When Tom asked me to do it this time, he said, you have 25 and you're before the coffee break. So it's a little bit different situation. We're going to try and give you a little bit of flavor for what's out there. In the R&D world, there are some new rules that could be very, very useful to the companies you work with. The goal is definitely not to tell you everything there is to know about R&D, because that would probably be a couple of days session. So, as I mentioned, there's a couple, I got to see the slides here, there's a couple of significant, there's a couple of very significant changes in the tax law this year, effective for 2016, that are going to make a very big difference for a lot of companies. The first thing you may have heard of is the law is finally permanent after literally decades of having a law that was expiring every 2 years. Companies always uncertain about how and when the law is going to be reenacted or re-extended. In some cases, re-extended retroactively for more than a year. We have a lot of certainty now in that we know what the rules are, we know what the playing field is, and we also have a couple of more options in order to take R&D credits. The two other really key provisions that are new for 2016 is, the first is they came out with a new rule. Historically speaking, businesses could never use R&D credits to offset what is called their alternative minimum tax. It was a very big limiter on the ability of businesses to use these credits. Now, beginning in 2016, for businesses of less than $50 million, you can now use your R&D credits to offset AMT also. And those rules would apply to corporations, they would apply to partnerships, they would apply to S-corps. Partnerships and S-corps obviously are probably the biggest benefactors of these rules, because they're the size that would be most affected by the new rules. But we expect to see a really big benefit in our client base this year, because that, historically speaking, has been one big deterrent to companies going to take R&D credits, is this AMT limitation. The other thing which is really cool in the R&D world is, historically speaking, we work with a lot of startup businesses. And the startup businesses would always say, Scott, we're spending all of our money on R&D. Why isn't there a tax benefit for this? Well, there is a tax benefit for it, but you can only use it if you have taxable income. And as we're all probably familiar, that may not happen for years and years with startup businesses. So now for 2016, the IRS has finally recognized some of this, and they've put rules, and Congress has put rules in effect that says, look, if you're a startup business with less than $5 million of gross receipts, we will actually let you compute your R&D tax credits and use up to $250,000 of those credits against your payroll taxes. So now for these small startup businesses, there's an instant cash benefit to these R&D credits, and especially these are the companies who are burning cash like crazy, and most of that cash burn is going into an R&D process. We expect to see a lot of benefit for that. We're still waiting for some rules to come out on how exactly this will be administered. As far as we know, or what we've been told so far, beginning with the first quarter 2017 payroll tax returns, you'll be able to take the credit against those payroll tax returns and actually get cash back, again, limited to $250,000 per year, but still a huge improvement over where we've been in the past. Why have an R&D credit? I think that's pretty self-explanatory in this city with all the research and manufacturing activity going on. The one thing I'll say is that a lot of people really wonder whether they're really doing R&D. What I will tell you is that if you're a manufacturing company or you're working with manufacturing companies, it's virtually 100% that you are doing R&D. Now, whether you're doing enough of it to make a credit study worthwhile, that's maybe a little different answer, but it's virtually guaranteed that you are doing R&D. And typically the tax law defines R&D much more broadly than what you might think of as R&D. I think the business community tends to think of it as if I don't have men and women running around in white lab coats, then I'm not doing R&D, and nothing could be further from the truth. What's the benefit? Generally speaking, we're looking at 3 pools of costs for R&D. We're looking at wages. We're looking at contract R&D. So R&D, maybe you don't have the capability of doing in-house, so you're farming it out to somebody else. And we're looking at the supplies that you consume in your R&D process. So big picture, very, very broad rule. Take all those 3 buckets of costs, throw them all together, and the cash benefit of the R&D credit is somewhere around 7% of that bucket of costs. Can be more, can be less, depending on your own particular situation. But that's a decent rule of thumb to use in determining whether it's worth looking at further. Again, some considerations in whether or not to take the credit. Are you making a profit? Can you use the credits? That would, of course, be applicable to anybody falling outside the new startup rules. AMT, is that an issue? That would, of course, be applicable to anybody greater than the $50 million companies I mentioned earlier. Do I have NOLs I have to burn through? If I'm a pass-through entity, if I'm a partnership, if I'm an S-corp, will my shareholders be able to actually use these credits in their own personal tax situations? So there's lots of considerations, but again, if you're working in manufacturing, you're incurring the cost, it's worth taking a look at. So one of the interesting things is the IRS actually identifies R&D as beginning at the moment of conception, if you will, of this idea you have, or this product you have, or this improvement you have, and it goes all the way through until commercial production, in the case of a lot of the parts manufacturers that we have, all the way through until you've got a PPAP approval. There's a few requirements, 4 basic requirements for something to qualify under R&D. It must be technological in nature. It relates to you're trying to create something or improve the function or performance of what they call a business component. The term business component is a very broad term. It could be a product. It could be a process. Under new rules that came out last year, it can be internal software. Historically speaking, only commercially developed software, I should say software developed for commercial sale was eligible for R&D. Now internally used software can be eligible for R&D. Very, very importantly, it must involve the process of experimentation, what we call the iterative process. It must be a trial and error process. Interestingly enough, the IRS says when you embark on this process, you don't need to know if you can be successful. You just have to have some doubt as to how you will be successful. So we're not asking anybody to, for instance, invent the driverless car here. It could be something you know you're capable of doing. You're just not sure of the steps that you need to take to get there, and that's where the trial and error process comes in. And again, what you're trying to do is eliminate the uncertainty and the obstacles in your path through this trial and error process. Few things do not qualify for the R&D credit. If it's style, taste, cosmetic, social science or arts, if the activities are being conducted, for instance, in your foreign research center, you're offshoring those research activities, those don't count. If you're pulling one of your competitors' products and you're in effect reverse engineering it, pulling it apart, trying to figure out how to make it better, that process doesn't count. And also, data collection, routine quality control, market research, etc., does not count. So as we've talked about, one of the fallacies of the R&D credit is that it's only for big businesses. It's only for big taxpayers. I've got taxpayers right now taking R&D credits which might range from a few $1,000s for a very small taxpayer, maybe a $5 million taxpayer, all the way up to a $2 million tax credit for one of my biggest clients. Everybody in between qualifies, and everybody in between is taking them. So don't assume just because you're small that it's not worth the effort or that you're not eligible for the credit. This, I think, is really interesting. It's a listing of all the industries that are probably doing some sorts of activities that qualify for the credit. It's much more expansive than you might think. Obviously, in our marketplace, manufacturing is the king of the companies taking these credits. And again, virtually anybody who's manufacturing is doing activities that qualify for the credit. But there's a lot of other interesting industries here, if you're working with these types of companies, that may qualify for the credit based on some of the things they're doing. This is a very non-comprehensive list of some of the activities which companies typically do, which would qualify for the credit. Typically, there's probably many more things they're doing that qualify for the credit, but this is just a somewhat limited list. How involved is it for me to go and investigate taking the R&D credit? Typically speaking, what we try and do when we evaluate a company's basis for taking the R&D credit, we'll go out and talk to the meeting. We'll talk to usually the chief financial person. We'll talk to somebody who is very, very key in the product development process, and try to understand the number of activities they are doing, the number of if you will, R&D projects they are addressing in any 1 year at a time. Try to put some very, very high-level numbers around it in order to figure out what a range of the actual credit might be. Generally speaking, this process might only take a 2-hour meeting and a couple of hours for us to review numbers back in the office. And with that little investment of time, we can figure out what the potential benefits of an R&D credit are. The other thing is we generally won't do an R&D credit study or won't recommend a study unless we think there's at least a 3 or 4x immediate payback in terms of usable credits on the time and cost invested. So, very, very painless process to figure out if you actually should be pursuing it further. Again, the payroll rules, this is one of the most exciting provisions to come along in the R&D in quite a while. The basic rules are right here on the slide, but it's going to be very, very beneficial to a lot of the small startup businesses that we work with. Right now, we're really just waiting for some better guidance to come out from the IRS as to how those businesses will actually claim the credits and recoup their cash. This is a big one right here. I mentioned it earlier. The $50 million client base or taxpayer size is right in our sweet spot with a lot of companies we work with. Historically speaking, they've always been very limited on the use of the credits simply because of shareholders are in AMT, or in the case of a corporation, the company is AMT. For those of you who work on your own taxes, you know that it almost is virtually impossible not to be in AMT anymore. So this benefit for $50 million companies and less is going to be extremely valuable. I mentioned the software development industry. A lot of the companies we work with are doing internal software development products, and they're spending a lot of time internally. Even they might start with a off-the-shelf software package or a canned software package, but they're spending a lot of time internally modifying that and customizing that and trying to make a product there that helps them run their businesses better, more efficiently, more profitably. Those efforts now can qualify for the credit also. They never did before. As I mentioned, it only qualified before if you were trying to build some type of software product that was going to be available for commercial sale and in the commercial markets. Obviously, web applications, phone applications, all that manner of the marketplace all potentially qualifies for R&D credits, and that's an extremely bursting area of opportunity for taxpayers. Here's a couple of the qualifications for your company building software. That's the right slide. There you go. So it's got to be, used to be, have to develop for sale, lease, or license. Doesn't anymore. As long as it's, again, an improved process, an improved functionality, or something that helps you run your business better, it'll qualify. I mentioned the performance improvement software, the applications, processing financial transactions, delivery tracking, inventory control. A lot of companies now are spending tremendous amounts of money on ERP systems, enabling them to help and run their overall businesses. A lot of those costs could qualify. Cloud computing, very big out there. We do it for time, okay. Let's talk a little bit more about what qualifies, what types of your expenditures actually qualify for the credit. We call them QREs, Qualified Research Expenditures. As I mentioned, there's three main buckets. You've got salaries and wages, you've got supplies costs, you've got contractor costs. On the wages bucket, the only thing that qualifies are W-2 wages, box 1 W-2 wages. You don't get to take into account payroll taxes, you don't get to take into account medical benefits, insurance benefits, all those other things that the HR folks worry about. For purposes of the R&D credit, you only get to take into account box 1 wages. There is, interestingly, an 80% rule in effect, and it really comes into play quite often. If you've got an employee who is spending more than 80% of their time on qualified research activities, then the tax code just lets you throw in 100% of their wages as qualifying R&D wages. One of the most difficult portions, or I should say least detailed portions of the study, is actually figuring out, first you find out all your R&D projects. What am I doing that qualifies? Why do they qualify? What's the uncertainty I'm solving? And once you figure out all of those items, now I've got to assign dollars to those processes. And that's where the financial people come in. We find the most successful R&D projects are those types of companies that actually have what we call a job shop, where projects are actually accounted for separately. As people work on them, they actually keep track of their time by project. But by no means does that throw out people who don't account for their projects on a job-by-job basis. IRS allows a lot of allocation methods, a lot of survey methods. One of the things we often do is provide surveys to the employees that we think are working on R&D projects. It might take them 20 or 30 minutes to fill out a survey, but it's really good substantiation for the IRS later of what the employee is doing and how what they're doing meets the test under the regulations. Supplies are, most importantly, you see the first term there, is non-capitalizable materials and supplies. One of the biggest questions I get is, I'm spending all this money on machinery and equipment. Can I include my depreciation as one of my R&D expenses? The answer is unfortunately no. However, interestingly enough, depreciation is not allowed if you decide to lease that machine instead of buying it. The rent expense is permissible, so you go figure it out. Examples here, prototypes, tools, dies, travel expenses aren't included. Some of the other things we see, if you have a dedicated electric line, utilities can be thrown in there if you can demonstrate how they relate to the actual R&D process. But anything that would be actually consumed in the R&D process in terms of tangible property can actually be used as part of your credit calculation in the supply. Again, contract research is those performance of services that maybe you don't have the time or the capacity or the wherewithal to perform in-house, so you ship them out and have somebody else perform them. The IRS will let us include 65% of those expenses. The only requirement there is that your supplier gets paid regardless of whether they are successful in accomplishing that which you want them to accomplish. So you, as the taxpayer, have to assume all the financial risk for their success. If they're only paid if they're successful, then the IRS says that's their R&D expense, not yours. So that's one of the overall writing factors of R&D, is the company's got to be financially at risk for the success of the product. Can I claim R&D credits for prior tax years? Absolutely. You can go back up to any open tax year. Typically it's 3 years. Could be longer in the case of a lot of NOLs. But you can always go back and can generate very substantial refund claims. The next question we get often is, yeah, but isn't the IRS going to be all over me at that point? And the question is typically no. I will definitely say there's a higher chance of audit if you go back and claim refund claims. However, for companies that actually claim R&D every year and it just goes into their originally filed returns, there's virtually no additional exposure at all that you'll get audited just because of the R&D credits. So I think I have to cut off now. Tom's going to come up to release you to coffee break. If you have any questions, I'll be around during coffee break. Feel free to grab me, and I'll help you with any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Obviously, I know it's a very important topic as we look out in front for our clients to making sure that they're taking advantage of this, because every dollar they can save, obviously, is a dollar they can reinvest. So next, we're finally at our first break. When we come back at 10:05, Dave Bernard's going to give a great presentation on autonomous vehicles. All right, so let's have a 15-minute break. Thank you. All right, if I could have everybody take their seat, we're going to get started. We certainly don't want to cut David's presentation short here, so.
Yeah, just you do the basics.
Quick basics.
Quick about it too.
I don't want to. I know you got a great presentation, so I don't want to hold you up.
I sure hope so. I think.
Is this mic off? I want to make sure it's off so I don't do any feedback.
They will turn it off when I leave.
Okay, good, gotcha.
I think so.
Okay.
All right, we're going to get started. If everyone could take their seat, please. I'd like to welcome Dave Bernard. Dave spoke down at our Atlanta office. And there's no pressure on him, but he had one of our highest speaker ratings ever down in our Atlanta presentation.
Oh.
So we're just so you know. So we are very excited. You know, Dave is literally a serial entrepreneur. I love this. Longtime technologist, innovator, investor, living in Atlanta, Georgia, an expert in new and emerging technology. Dave co-founded several companies, including the Intelligence Group, an innovative technology consulting group that was recognized as one of Georgia's top 40 most innovative companies in 2007. So let's give Dave a warm welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to get my timer started here so I stay within time. I actually have never finished a presentation on time, so I'm really looking for the first. Thanks for those kind remarks. I got to tell you, all these ties out here are so intimidating. I've never spoken in front of people with so many ties on. You guys really got to loosen up. So my talk's going to be about, and you can kind of tell my opinion, it's inevitable, about the driverless car revolution. What I'm going to do is, and first, just as a kind of an introduction, the slides you have in your printed material, not exactly the same as what I've got. I've modified them since. Once I saw what everybody else was presenting, I kind of modified mine so it's a little more complementary and not overriding, because normally I do talk about regulatory and policy issues, and other people have covered that more than adequately. I thought the presenters we've already seen today offer some very valuable information. There's some very important points in there I hope you're taking away from all this. Quickly about myself. I've been a software developer for almost 40 years. So I started in the 70s doing this stuff. So I really do see the world through a lens of software development. And that's why what's happening in the driverless car business right now is very much a software play. And that's one of the things I hope to get across to you today is to see this through that lens and what that means and how you can evaluate what's going to happen next, because that's what makes what's going to happen to me so very clear. And that's what I hope to convey to you today. Okay? All right, so first, a couple of quick points, things that I really believe in. You've probably seen this Arthur C. Clarke quote before. The more important quote is the second one, and not because it's something, I didn't necessarily dream it up, but it's something that is a mantra that you'll hear throughout this presentation. And actually, this is a mantra as an entrepreneur and as a technologist that also rings true. And I know of no counter arguments. I'd love to hear one if you've got one. I've spoken in front of a lot of people who cannot give me one yet. So if you would like to be the first one, I'm all ears. But convenience trumps everything. Okay? It trumps safety. It trumps cost. It trumps everything. Okay? A bottle of water costs 2,000 times more than it does to get it out of your tap. And there's only one reason for that, because it's a lot more convenient to carry it around. Okay, so we've already voted with our feet in pocketbooks on convenience. Now, a couple of quick points here. We're going to go and just get it out of the way really quick. Autonomous vehicles are already here. All right, so they're already here. Most of you are driving semi-autonomous vehicles anyway. If any of you have a Tesla, it's capable of doing this. This is an actual case from a year ago of a couple that took their Tesla from California across the country. It's about 8,000, I think it was an 8,000 mile trip. No, it was less than that, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was almost 8,000 miles, and 95% of it was in the auto drive mode. That was a year ago, okay, when it was a lot harder to find charging stations, and the software wasn't nearly what it is now. This is all being done. And actually, when you see a Tesla out on the road now, those people are very likely to be driving it in autonomous mode, even though they're not supposed to. Okay? And this is going to be another point you'll hear on and on. I love the policy discussions. The rule of law I'm in love with as well. But people will use convenience. Convenience trumps law as well. Okay? So just to bring that up. So we've talked before, we've already heard the idea that safety is a big driver of this. And certainly when I got involved in this 5 or 6 years ago, that was one of the big things. Two things. How to be safer in the car while we're being productive. Okay, I used to come up to Detroit all the time to these nuanced auto forums because I have a patent portfolio in natural language understanding of mobile devices. And so I was very interested in voice in the car. And I'd come up here all the time, and they'd have these rolling stock vehicles with all these supposed safety features where you could text while you're speaking and do emails, but you had to correct it on a screen, which I thought didn't seem too safe. The argument, I mean, the conversation changed over the years from safety to productivity. They kind of admitted to themselves that safety wasn't doing it. That wasn't the reason. It was productivity. And about that time is when I became convinced that this was the problem. That autonomy, if you really want safe vehicles, you have to rid the world of human drivers. You've got to do it. That's the only, otherwise it's not safe. Okay, and there's actually a very good commercial on right now. I don't remember the maker, but there's these people daydreaming in the car, and then the lane change ADAS comes on and brings them back to reality. Okay, this is really actually a very good example of cognitive load. You don't even need to be talking or texting. In fact, the academic literature shows that talking to the passenger next to you is the same cognitive load as testing. Okay, and the whole idea of a level 3 car where you have to take control back from autonomous system. From what? Reading the paper? Okay, and all of a sudden you've got about 3/4 of a second to react to something that the computer doesn't know what to do. I don't even know why that option's in there. You know, it's either, to me, it's either fully autonomous or not. It's not, there's not anything in between. Okay, so bug in the seat. 94% of all accidents are human error. You know, we've seen all these kinds of statistics. Tens of thousands of people dying, lots of people in accidents. So there's that. But I also think that what we're running into is a complete redefinition of transportation. I think, and I'm going to tell you why this is. But if we're going to redefine transportation, because really transportation is human augmentation, right? We could walk to work, we could ride a bike, but cars are just more efficient for us as far as time, because that's what we value. So really what's going to happen with this, the convenience of redefining transportation is going to be the driving factor here. So you've got to think of this not as the auto industry, but as the mobility industry. Okay, so mobility worldwide is about an $8 trillion a year market. So by contrast, the Chinese economy is about 10. Okay, so you're talking about a disruption of a marketplace nearly the size of the Chinese economy. Okay, with just mobility. Okay, for Elon Musk, I'm going to talk about later, that's not big enough. He's got much bigger plans than that, but we'll talk about mobility for now. Okay, so we're talking about all the automobile industry, we're talking about rental cars, taxis, subways, all the ways we move people. I would say even airplanes and rail will come into this at some point, but let's just exclude that for now. So that's the kind of transformation we're talking about, and to this end, What we're really talking about is a whole mobility as a service model. Let me make a few points about that. We've already seen mobility as a service with Uber and Lyft, right? How many have taken an Uber or Lyft ride? Anybody taken one? Okay, so you're one of the billion or so rides they've done this year. Even though they're heavily regulated out of places, they still have managed to provide billions of rides to people. Okay, this is coming. All right? So imagine a world where you actually didn't own the car. That's what I think is going to happen. That most people are not going to own the car. There's a lot of good reasons for that. There's no CapEx for buying a car, no insurance. There's no maintenance. There's no gas because all these cars have to be electric, and I'll talk about why that is. Okay? So you're just going to order up rides as a service. Plus, you get to order up the exact vehicle you need at that time. Right now, we buy a general purpose vehicle that's got to do all the things we do during the year. While we park it 90% of the day and it doesn't move, okay, that's really inefficient when you think about it. You spend all this money on a depreciating asset that sits idle most of the time, and it's a general purpose vehicle. So you want to impress a girl on a date, you order up a Ferrari to come get you. You need to take the kids to soccer. If they're just your kids, maybe it's an SUV. If it's the whole team, maybe it's a bus. Okay? You get the point. So you can order up what you need. It's all personalization. It's what we do with our phones already. Okay? You think about a society that's heading toward personalization. It's what Facebook throws those ads up there because they know what you're doing. It's all personalization. Mobility will become personalized. Just think about it that way. Just want you to open your minds a little bit to that. So what does that do? Some certain kinds of things that might happen. So some things might be that if you were to combine safety, extreme safety, and mobility as a service, then if the crash rate's going way down, and we've already talked about kind of auto insurance being, really a sidelined industry. And most likely the manufacturers will self-insure, in my opinion. Volvo has already said they will do that. But also about parts manufacturers, which some of you may be involved with. If there's no crashes, there's not really much need of parts to replace those. Okay, I gave this talk at Genuine Parts down in Atlanta where they're headquartered, and their jaws were hitting the floor on this. I think that that's a very important part to think about. The other thing is if cars are not getting nearly as many crashes, do we need to protect the occupants as well as we do now? It sounds crass and flippant, but the materials that you make cars out of may not be the same. They may be lighter weight, but still provide that kind of safety. Okay? If you're not driving the car, if it's a driverless vehicle, right now my kids don't look out the windows as it is, okay, when we're driving them somewhere. So a driverless vehicle actually doesn't need windows. If you think about that, that whole interior space can become used for something else. So if you're in the auto glass business, that might be a suspect business in the future. Okay, but if you're in maybe the video display business, maybe you figure out a way to wrap the whole interior in a video display device and display whatever they want to see. Okay, so just a few ideas to think about. If you start thinking down these lines, this is what could happen. All right. So a little bit about industry disruption. Here's something. I was also in the mobile payments business. I ran a global payments business for a while, and I had a friend of mine in the financial service business who said every payment method is additive. People still use cash and write checks and credit cards. So every new payment method, if you're tapping it, that's just an additive method. I think mobility change is the same. We're going to add a bunch of new methods, but not all the old methods are going to go away. We're still going to have people who own their own cars and drive combustion engine cars. There'll be some of those still, and they'll want to do that. But the trend is going to be that those will be niche markets eventually. All the autonomous vehicle technology is built right now and is intended to work with non-autonomous vehicles on the road with them. They have to, right? So that coexistence is possible and likely. Although you may be relegated to your own lane. They may turn the HOV lanes into the human driver lanes. It might even put a big old barrier next to it so you don't hit anybody else because you are a human driver and you're very dangerous. About disruption, real quick. This is an interesting slide. This is actually the last couple of years of data. It's very recent on Brooklyn taxi pickups. There's a couple of interesting things about this. The two taxi lines, the yellow and green lines, are actually kind of flat. Okay, so I could, some wild-eyed futurists say, oh, those guys are going out of business, and their medallion prices are going way down in New York. They're down by almost 2/3 right now. But they're kind of flat. But look at the Uber. The Uber line is just off the charts, right? This is exactly what happened with when the iPhone came out. Okay, the iPhone it's not a zero-sum game. Again, this is additive. Uber is finding a new market. This is a new market they're grabbing. It's not taking away a lot of taxi market. It's a new market. So a lot of this stuff is another way to look at this. How do you get yourself positioned to deal with whole new market players and consumers who are now going to come into this marketplace? And if a self-driving car can now take your elderly parents places where you're worried about them driving. ADA applications, okay? Even take your dog to the groomer. There'll probably be specialized vehicles to do that. Okay, my wife cannot wait for the soccer mom car to come by and pick up the kids. She's ready for that now. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about, got a new vocabulary here. This is actually something, again, to think about as we go forward with this. Augmentation, Internet of Cars, smartphone on wheels, all this stuff, but the key thing here is software driven. Okay, so software driven is the big thing here. And the way software people think is much different than the way manufacturers think. Okay? We're already seeing this with Tesla, and there's already plenty of examples about how this is working well. Just in the area of recalls alone, this is a very, very different thing. So Tesla, right now, if you want to change the features, the hard features on your car, you got to get a new car. Okay? With Tesla and similar, this and many of the other manufacturers, the way they're thinking about it is that I'm going to put the basic sensor package on there, and I'm going to use software to improve it all the time. So the camera actually doesn't have to be that good, but the software can make it better every year without replacing the hardware. Similar to these other sensors like LiDAR that you're hearing about and other things like that, proximity sensors, that is all stuff that they can put on the car and it can stay there for 10 years. But the software will get better all the time. Tesla actually had a recall issue last year. I don't remember, it was a third-party switch, and it was a recall situation, some kind of fire, and they figured out a software workaround for it. So overnight, they sent a software update to every car out there and fixed the problem. So where most recalls have about a 70% adherence rate and require the car to come in to be fixed. So the software engineering mind says it's all going to be software driven. We want to update this thing with no cost to us, very low cost, and make sure because of liability issues and because we might be self-insuring ourselves, we want every car to have it. We want to make sure every car has it. Okay, so they can do that, and you're not even aware that it's happening. That's part of the deal. That is if you own the car. If you don't own the car, you don't care. Okay. So we're going to talk about some of these other disruptive software-based concepts like open source, beta testing, APIs, crowdsourcing. All of this stuff is happening now in the autonomous car industry. Very, very software-like. Okay. Okay, so some quick points here. So we've talked about, and this is going to go right to the heart of suppliers and manufacturers. So Silicon Valley is forcing this. They ain't doing it for safety. They're doing it for eyeballs. So if all this time you're spending in the car, you don't have to pay attention to the road, what are you going to do? Right? Everybody's going to do that. They're already doing it. You're already doing it. Admit it. Okay. So actually there's people, smart people who figured out how many eyeball minutes that is. And it's a rather large number. I did actually some back of the envelope numbers off of census data, and my number came to 4 billion man hours a year that would be freed up. The Washington Post thinks the number is 30 billion, which is actually equal to 3.4 million man years of attention. Okay, that's a lot of attention. that you can sell people stuff. All right? Content, goods. And that's where online, we all know online buying is accelerating. Showrooming is accelerating. So this is why Facebook has a rolling stock autonomous car. This is why Apple is working on it. Even though Apple fired, they're going to get out of the manufacturing business, they still want to own the software side of it, just like they do iOS. So the way to think about this now is everyone familiar with Foxconn? Does anybody know who Foxconn is? Okay, so Foxconn is the Chinese company that makes all of Apple's hardware. Okay, they have nothing to do with the software. Apple does the software, which is really owning the customer. And Apple even goes further by owning the store, the way you get your apps. And Google doesn't do that, but you can get your apps other ways. But Apple wants to own that vertical market, and Foxconn is only the manufacturer. Okay, I think this is the way the autonomous car is going to go, and this is where you guys fit in. Okay, this is why Apple's getting out of the manufacturing business too. They realize that they can't compete with Detroit on making physical cars. Uber still thinks they might. Delphi and Mobileye, who knows what's going to happen there. But Apple has said, no, we're going to do deals with those guys and let them build. But we're going to own all the software, we're going to own the customer, and we're going to own the data. I don't think there's any way around that happening. They're too good at it, and it's actually not a fair fight economically. They got a lot more money. Okay, so if you think about it, like my point here is better to be Foxconn than BlackBerry. So any attempts in the auto industry to try to own this whole verticalization of the supply chain ain't going to happen. These guys will cut it off. At some point, it would be worth their while to actually spend a few $1 billion of all the cash they have on their balance sheets to build an auto factory. Okay, so let's go on. Actually, I'm going to skip this next one. I had a really... I'm going to play just a piece of this. This is a good one. Okay, so that's our entertainment segment of the speech. This is actually an interesting illustration of what's possible. Okay, if you have autonomy and also vehicle-to-vehicle communication, which is another thing we won't talk about too much, but where cars know where the other cars are and what they're doing, you could do this. There's no real need for traffic signals. There's really actually not really any need for rules of the road because all the machines are talking to each other and making decisions for you. And you don't care because you're not even looking out the windows anyway. So again, this is just an illustration. And by the way, that's CGI. They didn't actually stage that. Somebody clever in France put that together. I thought it was pretty good. So how is this happening? Well, we actually have, in my opinion, an unprecedented convergence of technologies. It's really the first time all these things have come together. And that's why trillions of dollars of unlocked value is at stake, not billions. Okay, we're at the $1 trillion level. So, these things are things like, electrification, AI, machine learning, Internet of Things, cybersecurity. All these things have now kind of all reached critical mass almost at the same time and are making all this stuff possible. So really, the pieces to do this successfully and at scale exist. They already exist. The money exists to make it happen too. Looks like policy is also headed in that direction as well. Much different than the drone guys who are getting hammered by the FAA. Okay, much different. All right? So, we're going to just whip through. Machine learning is one thing. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a second. We have artificial intelligence. This is a really important concept, and we'll go into that. Internet of Things is not to be taken lightly. Everybody's heard of it. Basically, we're expecting in the next, and the numbers are all over the place, 50 billion to 100 billion devices all connected together nationwide. Actually, right now, if you walk through Manhattan, you're within 100 yards of 3,000 devices. typically, wherever you walk. It's already happening right now. All these things want to talk to each other, and they're all going to add value to your lives while they take away your privacy. Because, by the way, that's what you're going to give up. And actually, you're going to love giving up your privacy, by the way. And that's a whole other talk. So let's go on. Internet of Things. Sensor disruption. This is really interesting stuff. Actually, the Mobileye and Delphi guys, Mobileye just left Tesla. Some of you guys may know. Tesla, of course, that doesn't matter too much to them. They've got a pretty good set of sensors themselves. But this has just a couple of quick points I want to make about this. I actually, when I first looked at some of this LiDAR stuff, I said, well, I want to put one of these on top of my house and use it as a burglar alarm and let it tell me when the deer are walking by back there. It's that good. But it also has some law enforcement and social implications. If you've got a whole bunch of cars with LiDAR painting their environment, this is what Google cars do, by the way. What if you see a purse snatching on the side of the road? Or you detect a domestic argument? Do you call the cops? You may have seen these Amazon Echoes and Alexa devices you can stick in your house and just talk to. They're always on. What if they hear a disturbance? There's some social implications to some of that because that is data and who is responsible for it. Okay? Would you be liable? Just something to think about. Some other kind of interesting things here. This one blew me away when I first saw it last year. Tesla actually outsold every large luxury vehicle in 2015. Not just electric ones. Every large luxury vehicle is outsold. Their sales rate now has doubled since that time. And you already had, 400,000 people put money down for the next unbuilt model. There's definitely demand, and these numbers are not very large, okay, by just standards, but as they compare to other marks there, and when I read the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, some of these papers, they are saying, auto industry people are saying, we have to compete with Tesla. And I'm like, that's a pretty strong statement. They're not ignoring them, and they do see them as a competitor, a real competitor. But these numbers are very interesting, okay? So actually, if you're driving a Lexus, you're not driving the coolest thing on the road, clearly. Right? Okay, so another big thing here, electric car domination. Just a few quick points about this. If you have a mobility as a service, right? So your duty cycle on your combustion engine car right now is about 5%, 10%. And look what you got to do to keep it on the road. I mean, you got to maintain this thing like crazy. Put new tires on it. Gas, you got to lube it all the time, you got to change the oil. That's all got to go away. If you have a mobility as a service where that duty cycle is reversed, and it's got to stay on the road a lot, you need a lot fewer moving parts. Not the 250, 300 that are in a combustion engine. You mean more like the 20 that are in an electric engine. So that's why electric, it's not just about fuel, it's about efficiency and cost and maintenance. Okay? That's why it has to be electric. You can't do a mobility as a service network with combustion engine cars. And it hasn't changed in 100 years. It should be disrupted. So, in my opinion. But that brings us to our next thing. All right? So, Tesla's very cool. Elon Musk's cool. He's got a space company. He's got a solar power company. He's got a coolest car company on earth. But that doesn't matter to him. This is what matters. Remember I talked about $8 trillion markets not being enough? This is a guy who wants to stand on the surface of Mars in 2025. Okay? So, car batteries represent about a third of the weight of the car right now in an electric car. And they're very expensive. So driving that efficiency is very important. But Elon Musk, in my opinion, the Tesla is a lost leader for batteries. Okay? It's a way to force battery innovation. And why is that? That's because he thinks he can decentralize the entire world's electric grid. Okay, I want to say that again, in case you weren't listening. He actually wants to decentralize the entire world's electric grid. And he has the numbers. He knows what it takes to do that. Okay, so his factories actually build this thing called a Powerwall. Some of you may have heard of it. You can actually put it in a building. It'll run a Walmart right now. A year ago, when he first started selling them, first week of sales, he sold $800 million worth. And that's about 3 months of Tesla sales. Okay? So believe me when I tell you, this is much more valuable. This is also going to be the largest building in the world when it's done. His competitors are Panasonic and a couple of other smaller companies. But this is all about taking advantage of free energy, which is renewables, which is solar, wind, things like that. That's getting very efficient and very inexpensive. Germany, the UK, and Denmark have already had petroleum-free energy days in their countries, countrywide. Entire country ran on alternative fuel or alternative energy sources for at least a day. That happened this year. This is coming. In fact, Denmark actually generates half their energy use right now from wind power alone because they're in a windy place. Sometimes the wind is high, sometimes it's low, so what do? You got to store the excess, right? That requires batteries that are really efficient. This is important. He says the city of Boulder, Colorado, 100,000 people, needs 10,000 of these to run the city, and you're off the grid. He thinks you need about 160 million of them to get the U.S. off of the electric grid, and another so many of them get you off of natural gas as well. So this is where this is going. This is a much bigger than $8 trillion market. Okay, I only got a couple of minutes. Another kind of downstream effect here. The current oil glut we have was caused by a 2 million barrel a day displacement. 2 million barrel a day. That's all it took. Sounds like a lot, but it's really not. So electric cars are estimated, and actually I think these are really conservative numbers. The electric car market alone is estimated to displace that much within the next few years. So in my opinion, we're in a permanent oil glut. Price of oil is just not going to get much above 50 if it does. Okay? That has its own geopolitical ramifications. I'm not going to go in. So inevitability, in 9 years, that's 3 orders of magnitude improvement just in storage on computers. That's megabytes to gigabytes. Okay? And just want a couple quick graphs about, it's not a fair fight. These are market caps of tech companies versus auto companies. The amount of cash on their balance sheets is just obscene. It's not fair. Okay? This is also where tech investment is going. You won't find Detroit or Michigan on there, I'm afraid. You will find South Australia. I actually lived in South Australia. I know why that's there, because of the Holden Company. You find Georgia, Tennessee, no Detroit. So what I implore you to do is to think more about how you're going to attract that investment here. And you're going to need to be able to attract the talent to go with it. That's the hard part. That's the hard part. You have the ability to shape what's going to happen. GE Capital is going to come along, and they're going to buy 1 million of your cars and put them on a mobility as a service network. And they're going to raise a hedge fund that insures them. You're not going to use an insurance company for that. They could raise that money easily. But they're going to want you guys to build them. So I'm going to stop there. I'm out of time. And I'll be around for a while if you have any questions. There's plenty more where that came from. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. And fortunately, he's kept his record of not finishing on time intact. So that's, I do hope MDOT talked to you a little bit as we start this 75 expansion for the next 25 years to think about what it might look like. Well, for those of you I'm Steve McCarty, partner at UHY, and for those of you that do know me, you know that I absolutely love to have conversations about valuation with my clients. And so it's kind of interesting right now in town, though. It's we've sort of got our own little gold rush. And if you think back to the dark days of 2008, 9, and 10, I don't know that we would have been thinking about, you know, the excitement around the automotive industry here in Michigan. You know, those are dark days, and automotive's hot. Automotive is sexy, and back in 2008, automotive couldn't get a date, so it was bad. So things have definitely changed. And if you think just over the last 9 months, think about some of the major transactions that have occurred, right here in our space. With key safety systems and Joyson coming in early in the year. Just 3 years ago on this stage, we had a great client of ours, Paslin, who brought in a private equity partner to help fuel growth. Had a transaction earlier this year with a great pull, exiting the business. KUKA came next in the automotive space, right? We've seen a lot of headlines about KUKA and the transaction around that. Most recently, another company that Jim and I know well, and a great UHY client, is Continental Structural Plastics. A lot of noise in the marketplace about this process that has been run. Great company and ultimately going to be a great liquidity event for our client. So, makes you wonder, right? What's going to happen next? And I can assure you that there's a large number of transactions in the pipeline, and even today, we should be hearing of another major brand here in this Detroit market that will have been acquired by another Chinese state-owned enterprise. So the transactions will continue. There's no doubt about it. Now, if you're a lot like a lot of my clients that sometimes have forged lifelong relationships with these entrepreneurs, you might be more thinking, why does this keep happening to me, and how is this going to change our marketplace? Well, I can assure you there's going to be disruption and a lot of change to come. So I think that when we saw in the past, certainly with foreign-owned enterprises buying U.S.-based companies, they were interested in brick and mortar and iron and assets, tangible assets. But clearly now it's intellectual property, it's know-how, knowledge, and it's technology. And automation is a big part of that. So here to help me explain all this great stuff are my panelists, Jim Stargard and Bob Kendall. I'd like to give a brief introduction of both, and then I'll ask them some stumping questions here. Jim is a 33-year entrepreneurial executive and a veteran of automotive Tier 1 businesses. He's got a proven track record of growth and has held leadership positions in publicly traded companies, private equity-backed firms, and even venture-stage enterprises. As president and CEO of Plasan Carbon Composites since 2010, Jim's increased revenue by more than 1,000% from $10 million to nearly $100 million right now. He's established 2 state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities here in Michigan, and thank you, because he actually moved one from out of state back to Michigan, which was great. It's created over 500 advanced manufacturing jobs and has really validated and deployed proprietary carbon fiber technologies to launch the highest volume Class A carbon fiber applications here in North America. Seated next to Jim is my partner Bob Kendall. He's the Senior Vice President at UHY Corporate Finance. He advises clients routinely on mergers, acquisitions, provides sell-side advisory services to privately held businesses, assists clients in raising debt, raising capital from senior banks, mezzanine lenders, private equity firms, and other sources of capital as well. And Bob leads our financial planning and analysis for the firm, which includes valuation, modeling, really does some really robust financial models for a number of our clients. So Jim, maybe I'd like to start with you. Can you give us, give the room a little bit of background on PCC and some of the rapidly evolving technology that you're deploying there at Plasan?
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, for sure.
Plasan Carbon Composites is a company that's been around for about 10 years. We started as a small boutique manufacturer in Bennington, Vermont. Plasan, parent company out of Israel, needed a manufacturing base in North America, so they bought the Z06 Fender business, which was the start of carbon fiber in North American automotive. They're in the ballistic business, the military, the defense business, but they're intrigued by transportation, and they're intrigued by technology. And what Steve said is for a few years we ran in the autoclave business, making a part every 2 hours. shall we say. And that was state of the art. In fact, it was when Mr. McNally came to Detroit, he said that, Mullally, when he came to Detroit, said, there's no place for carbon fiber as long as it's tied to the autoclave in automotive. And that's true. You can't make a part every couple of hours. What we've done is we've been able to make a part and launch on the Corvette technology to make a part in under 20 minutes. And we did that starting in 2013 with the launch of the new Corvette Stingray, where we have all the hoods and the majority of the removable roofs. We've now validated technology to bring it under 10 minutes. And we'll be commercializing that as we go forward. We also partnered with Toray Industries, who's the largest carbon fiber manufacturer in the world. Toray bought a 20% stake in us. They are our supplier of material today, but with as rapidly as the technology is changing, no one really knows where the right answer is, because we can do as much as we want on the production side, taking cycle time out. One of the key milestones yet for carbon fiber is bringing the cost of the material down, because it's still the most significant part of the entire process. But 6 years ago, there wasn't a lot of activity in that area. Now, with what BMW has done, what we've done, what some other suppliers have done, there's a lot of activity to bring that cost down, which is going to be critical for advancing the state of technology. As Steve said, we have our R&D and prototyping facility and headquarters in Wixom, Michigan. We established that back in 2011. We have full-scale prototyping capability there. And then in Grand Rapids, just outside of Grand Rapids in Walker, we have 240,000 square feet of manufacturing space where we do the Corvette, the Viper, and a few other applications that we're working on. And I want to thank Steve and his team, because when we moved from Bennington, Vermont, where we had around 100 employees, we really didn't have the bandwidth as we're launching new technology, because launching new technology is all hands on deck. And so we enlisted the help of UHY to move us, and they managed the entire move for us. And we never missed a shipment. So that was a tremendous experience. And moving it to Michigan was the right thing to do. We needed to be close to the customers, because they need to see and touch and feel things that they're not comfortable with, that they're not experienced with. And that's really what we've tried to do with the company now.
So you're the poster child for doubling down on R&D. There's no doubt about it. So,
yeah, I want to talk about those R&D tax credits.
So can you maybe share with us how important you feel R&D is and in investing in a business today versus?
Yeah, R&D is critical. It's what's going to advance things, whether it's in a brand new technology as ours or in what some of the older technologies have done. Steel. Cars have been made out of steel for well over 100 years. And when plastics came in the 70s and 80s, there was steel. Now there's all kinds of grades of steel. There's high-strength, lightweight steel. They've done a lot of R&D to advance lightweighting, because lightweighting is going to be all materials. It's not going to be a single material. So the aluminum guys are investing. The SMC guys, Continental, are investing. We're investing. The supply chain is investing, because it's critical to advance. Because the talk about autonomous vehicles, about being different materials and how safe do they need to be, they're going to need to be safe. And lightweight, what BMW has done on the 7 Series. They took the experience from the i3 and the i8, and they've adapted it for more mass production on regular vehicles, 7 Series, not a regular vehicle. But it wasn't solely about lightweighting. They did the cage above the belt line in hybrid with high-strength steel and carbon fiber, getting the best balance. That didn't happen because they just decided to do it one day. They spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time figuring it out. So R&D is absolutely critical for advancing the state, because lightweighting is not just about lightweighting, it's also about improving safety.
Like Jim always tells me, PowerPoints and plaques don't cut it.
No, parts.
So, Bob, maybe, so we've heard from the entrepreneur's perspective about R&D. Maybe you can, give us a little thought on how R&D is viewed by foreign buyers, traditional private equity firms, and when we see those R&D expenditures in the P&L.
Absolutely. I think the first distinction to make between all those deals that we took a look at just a minute ago are foreign strategic buyers that are coming in and looking at these businesses, and distinct from private equity firms that I'd describe as financial buyers. So strategic buyers, we all know, is an operating company inside of an industry. And what distinguishes them most from financial buyers is that they have access in a lot of ways to synergies, to costs that can be squeezed out of the combined entity. And maybe most importantly, I think in the context of our discussion, on the revenue side, sales channels, if they can take products from other markets that they can get access to. And so I think it's no coincidence that these companies at the cutting edge of technology that spend the most money on R&D are most attractive to these strategic buyers, because one of the things additionally that differentiates them from the private equity funds is that they have a much longer time horizon. Each one of these buyers that bought these companies that we laid out here a few minutes ago has got a time horizon of 10 or 20 or 30 years that all of that these technologies are going to impact their businesses and drive their returns, which is distinct from a private equity fund that's got most often a time window of maybe 10 years. And so another thing that's important is what kind of R&D are we talking about, and where are we at in kind of the growth cycle of that market? If you take something like something that had this R&D that's further along, some of the software type things, some of the things that maybe we see in Tesla, where we foresee some rapid cash flow growth in the next 5 years or 7 years or something like that. That becomes interesting to financial investors. Something that's a little more long term, 10 years out. It's got a market that needs to be further developed. Jim talked about the material side of the carbon fiber industry, and that's a whole other area of development that's separate from manufacturing and those processes. And you talk about having to touch and feel to hold up an aluminum hood versus a piece of steel versus what carbon fiber can do. It's just unbelievable. But I think those are the moving pieces.
That's great. And I think when we talk about all of this, rapidly evolving technology, I think one of the challenges is financing this, is paying for all this R&D. And Jim, maybe as CEO, can you kind of share some of the challenges that you may have encountered or that you sometimes see in the R&D expenditure?
The challenges, the pain, or the experience?
Some scars?
Well, this isn't my first startup, and one of the things I told Steve and Bob early on was, a lot of new ventures don't fail because the technology wasn't good. They're underfunded. And that's because the time horizon for success is sometimes unrealistic, or it's been painted as unrealistic. It is expensive to launch new technology. It is expensive. You can just look at the annual reports of all the publicly traded tiers. One of the biggest reasons for, we didn't do quite as well last year is because we underestimated launch costs. Because they're not relaunching existing technology. Every launch is a new technology. And I think the other side of it is when you've got a company, a private company that's trying to go forward, it's great when you've just got an incubation lab somewhere and you've got venture capital or angel funding, and that's one level. When you've got a business that has been chugging along as a smaller boutique business like we were, but then you go and you want to make a magnitude jump. You are no longer venture capital. You aren't private equity. You're in that no man's land. And we were blessed to have an owner that was very successful in the defense business during the 2000s that was able to fund it because we funded it all with cash. Not everybody's able to do that. And that's an underserviced market because private equity is not ready for you yet because you're not going to be profitable next quarter. It takes a couple of years when you launch a major scale operation. The venture capital guys aren't interested anymore. So where do you go for that funding? And that's where a lot of new technology companies just fall and fail. And I think it's an underserved and it's an opportunity for people with vision. As Bob said, somebody who's got more than he's given private equity 10 years. I was in private equity. It's 3 to 5. But you need somebody with that 10 to 20-year vision if it's a disruptive technology. And changing materials is a disruptive technology and to really benefit. Because what you're doing is not only in the R&D side, when you capitalize a facility like we did, it's not like going out and buying used equipment because it was all brand new equipment. And it's always brand new equipment, as are the employees. People, you can't steal. An injection molder can go find people, can find equipment. You can put that together relatively easily. You do something different like this, it takes funding. And it can be a challenge.
Yeah. So when we talk a little bit about, Bob, the technology, innovation, the impact that it has on business value, can you maybe share some thoughts on, when do those upfront investments pay off, and, maybe on the other hand, what happens if you don't make those investments, and what happens to the company?
Absolutely. Absolutely. About 2 weeks ago, our team was in Spain talking to some strategic buyers in the European market that were, looking at one of our clients here in the U.S. And their M&A team sort of described it in a way that I thought was really interesting. They said any industry that you're in, automotive or whatever it is, it's always changing. Sometimes faster, sometimes slow, go through fits and starts, but something's always happening. And, well, an industry is made up of all the companies that are within that industry, and that can be a changing group. But some of them those companies have a rate of change inside of themselves as well, some faster and slower. And the ones that are changing the fastest, that are doing the most innovation, are the ones that are kind of pulling the industry forward, that are moving to the front of the pack. And the ones that are doing less of that it's not that they're sort of much fall behind, but everybody else kind of moves ahead of them. And industries develop and evolve that way. And the way it impacts valuation is, that's created by R&D and development. And you have a little bit of a J curve with investments like that, where you've got to spend money at the beginning, and the value that comes out of that is down the road. But what ultimately drives, the premium valuation multiples, the marquee deals that we all see in the papers, what drives valuation is ultimately risk, but also growth. And it's those new technologies, those new markets, the things that come out of R&D that have the biggest growth potential, both in the venture capital type world, but also inside of large organizations and public companies. So there's a price to be paid to make those investments to get you to the front of the pack, but you have to be there in order to capture that growth and to capture those premium valuations.
That's helpful. Jim, so I shared at the beginning a few slides about the influx of foreign capital kind of coming into this marketplace, into the automotive industry, and it's ultimately impacting the pace of technology and the pace of technological change. How do you view that? How do you view the competition? With these foreign buyers, you yourself are kind of United Nations there. You've got a couple of interesting owners. But what does this mean to the supply base, from your perspective?
Well, it's good as long as they're investing smartly and they're investing for growth and advancement of technology. I know there's a lot of concern about which country's coming in and doing what, and what's that doing to our intellectual base and our IP as a country or as an industry. As long as it's coming in and it's always going to be with the intention of growth. Everybody wants to grow. Everybody wants to get a good return. As long as the investments are coming in smartly and advancing the state of the art, I think it's helpful. I think it's good. And we are in a global market, and you're going to see more of that going forward.
Yeah, I think we all agree we're going to see a little more of that going forward. So. Bob, you touched a little bit on it, but the influx of foreign capital, impacting the M&A market and maybe multiples. What do you see the drivers of this trend? Driving that influx of foreign capital.
I saw a statistic a couple of days ago that the percentage of the M&A transactions in the auto space that were driven by Chinese investors was 5% last year or something like that. And that the forecast was that would rise to 25% on the part side. And what's I think interesting about that was the difference between the way an investor like Japan, we had Japan as one of the deals that we put up there, the way that they entered the market. Well, they entered the market by developing domestic car automaking industry, and then entering foreign markets by exporting those vehicles. and then entering the parts market as the parts suppliers follow their domestic OEMs into these markets. And now, we have what we see today. China seems to be following a very different strategy, where they've kind of gone parts first. And there's one of the initiatives that's coming from the top down, and obviously there's different political systems that are driving some of these things. Is there's a push to get into the parts industry, and so I think we've seen a lot of that. But I think the longer term play is that those kind of investments are required in order to get the technology and to get the skills and to get the things that they need to build their own domestic auto industry. Because even within China, the vehicles are viewed relative to the rest of the market, I think similar to the way that they are here. But they look at the long-term end game as establishing that domestic automotive industry that can then go out and compete. So it's kind of the opposite trend or opposite way of entering the market that Japan did. But I think that has long-term for valuations, deal size, and number of deals, and the parts business. I see that as a trend that continues for years to come.
So when you start thinking about having the powder in order to invest into R&D and and fund these R&D projects, maybe this is to both of you, I suppose, but what can companies do today to put themselves in a better market, a better environment, a better pitch to whether it's our financial lenders or financial sponsors, so that we can help accomplish the mission to fund some of that R&D growth, to ultimately fuel the project?
I think one of the keys for us 6 years ago, while we were a small company in Vermont, trying to excite the supply base was a little difficult. First of all, no one was talking about carbon fiber in North America. Everything was being done in Europe. And if you weren't a German company, the German equipment manufacturers and tool makers weren't really that excited about what you were trying to do. Then you do what we did, and we've attracted a lot of support from the supply base now. They see that things are happening in North America. They see advancements can be done. And so instead of doing it all on our dime, we're able to pull suppliers together. Not into joint ventures necessarily, but with a common vision and a common goal to advance the technology. So there's co-investment. I worked, when I first started working, guy running our business asked me when I was in sales, how many programs do you have with your customers? I was excited. I told him I had all these programs going with my customers. How many are co-investing with you? Didn't have many of those. Because that's really the thing. It can't all be on the back of one person or one company. You've got to have people with skin in the game, with a shared vision, co-investing so that they're going to be there all the way through the project. And I think that's one of the key ways, because if you look out and see a lot of finance people out here probably saying, where's he going? The idea is not only for you all, but also for our customers. It mitigates the risk to show that there's more behind it than just a single entity. And the customers like that, and hopefully the financiers like that, because the more skin you've got in the game from people with vested interest, the greater the possibility of successes.
So these are our companies in our second fund. I don't hold these up to hold up my companies, but just to give an example of, as I said in the beginning, what is mobility? Mobility is going top to bottom, cybersecurity. When we think about autonomous and connected cars, they don't work unless they're secure. So that's going to be an immense industry ensuring that all of those assets cannot be hacked, cannot be taken over en route. Elementum, this is the company I talked about, global supply chain virtualization. Lyft, you're aware of. Mass, task solutions, provisioning, whether it be manned or whether it be autonomous. And we see the investment by GM, their acquisition of Cruise. We see where these things are headed. Nutonomy, I talked about them as well. This is going to be an autonomous platform working with many people around the world. Smart cargo, the ability to stuff the underbelly of passenger airlines with a full payload of cargo rather than being half empty all the time. Again, the efficiencies to the airlines and to you and I to be able to ship something around the world at 1/10 of the cost that we're currently paying DHL or FedEx, that's huge. Telligis, fleet tracking for large fleets like Coca-Cola, AT&T. Transloc, the ability to understand how all the people in your community are moving based on their data feeds. And how are they using public trans? How can I better provide them services? And I'll also sell them different things that I want to, that I want to sell them by understanding that data. ZenDrive, a company that lets you know the exacting driving patterns of someone based on the data on their cell phone, and then becoming their own insurance provider as a result of that exacting data. AMS, we talked about, ocean-going drones. Lunar, the ability to give someone a cell phone in lower socioeconomic citizens and communities around our country, where right now they can't afford a $60 or $100 data plan at the beginning of the month, but they can afford $1 a day for YouTube, or 50 cents a day for Facebook. And all of these people are potential customers in an autonomous system when I can offer you a ride at a tenth of what it currently costs in your own vehicle. Again, it's the two sides of that marketplace. Companies that give a cash economy consumer the ability to access these mobility solutions. And Service.com, the company that allows you to kind of understand and get quotes right away from service providers. Mobility is broad. Mobility is big. It's a huge opportunity. So the thing I'd like to leave you with before we jump into the Q&A, I've said for many years that Detroit's past and present positions it perfectly to drive the future of mobility. I believe that with all my heart. We are a unique place in the world, and others will join us in this. Our friends in Silicon Valley, our friends in Stuttgart, our friends in Tokyo. There's billions of dollars going into this space. But we should own this here in this room. But we're only going to own it if we work together and we run after it right now, and we find ways within our internal organizations to say, how can I better engage with these young entrepreneurs? How can I bring in these and not young entrepreneurs, just young companies, but individuals from all walks of life that are driving this change. We have to break down those barriers. We have to move faster. Otherwise, we'll miss this opportunity. But I don't believe we will. We will beat South Australia. It is a pleasure to be here today, and I'm looking forward to talking with Tom.
Tell Chris has a great amount of passion, which we love, and there's just so much happening in the space, and it's happening so fast, and you can see why Bill Ford partnered up with them. Just a tremendous individual. So, question that runs through my mind, and I'm sure a lot of others, is mobility. Ultimately, do you think we have more vehicles on the road or less vehicles on the road?
It's a really good question. When we're talking with our friends, OEMs and Tier 1s, this always comes up. And I actually think that the number of vehicles on the road is less important than the type of vehicle on the road. So right now, we are kitting out vehicles to, average age of a vehicle on the road in the U.S. is about 11 years, give or take. The weight, the safety requirements is built for worst-case conditions, auto-grade. If we're in a fully autonomous world or a semi-autonomous world, but we can guarantee that those vehicles have a propensity for accident that's 100th of what it is now. Do we need the same type of vehicle build? Absolutely not. If I am a part of a TaaS or MaaS system, transportation as a service, mobility as a service, and I have a vehicle that's running 95% of the time, only down to charge, otherwise it's on the road and servicing people, is that vehicle going to need a lot more miles than the current amount of miles we have on cars? The answer is absolutely yes. So do we see a smaller, redesigned vehicle that has the ability to run 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 miles, but does so within a 6-month span before it's retired out or recycled in? I think the answer is that's what we're going to move toward. We're still going to need those differentiated types of vehicles for use cases. People are still going to want, my dream car is a 61 Ford Falcon. I'm super excited about that someday. I want to drive that alongside, and I want to drive it. I don't want the autonomous system to drive me around. So there's going to be a desire to have that and to do those things, or just to have functionality because you want to be on the road. It's super scary in some ways, to transition the question a little bit, I think for people that are any age to say you're not going to have control. Yeah. There's no wheel, there's no pedals. So that's going to take time.
Unless you're driving to Detroit.
That's true. But I always say, that I think kids born today are probably going to need a driver's license. I'm 100% that their children will not. And that's going to mean tremendous change in the space. But on vehicle number, I think that's going to dictate it. I don't know. Again, the number is the secondary question to the type.
That's a very, I get that. I ask that quite a bit myself, and there's just a lot of controversy about it.
Yeah.
Some people say, "Oh, the automobile is dead." I don't. I kind of agree with you. I kind of think I look at the vehicles of the future. I see a lot of opportunity actually for suppliers to get involved in the new architecture. But yeah, you have to be positioned, right? So.
And just as a quick aside, the important question there is, do we want to be the Foxcons of the world at 2% margins, or do we want to be the Apples of the world at 80?
That's right.
That's a question we have to ask ourselves as a community as it relates to auto in Detroit and in the United States.
Absolutely. So looking forward, do you see the kind of the traditional OEMs, and I mean Ford's getting involved with it, General Motors is making an investment also, that is mobility their next revenue stream?
I think eventually. I think right now it's a cost center. I think it'll become a revenue center. And those are hard arguments to have, especially when you're talking to your bean counters. It's like, let's spend for 10 years here because it's going to turn into an amazing opportunity. And they're like, whoa, buddy, let's not. We've got a really good thing going here, and it's a revenue center. I think mobility is going to be, I think it will be a big driver. And I think there's a lot of autos that are doing the right things. I think GM has been impressive in how they've engaged in the acquisitions they've made. And I think I give Dan Ackman a lot of credit over there, saying we're going to go and we're going to go now. And this is a vision we're executing on. I think Ford has been impressive in terms of how they've taken their experiments to the creation of Ford Smart Mobility and how they're driving that space on a forward-going basis. I think Daimler has been impressive. Mm-hmm. The standing up of Movell, which is a group focused uniquely on acquiring young businesses in transit data, payment, and the kind of the tertiary ways in which mobility is going to affect transportation. But I also think a lot of people haven't been serious enough. And there's two motivations amongst the auto industry that we've seen that is driving their engagement here. One is a sincere and focused strategic review, and the other is an intense amount of fear as to what's going to happen. And if we don't do something, what's going to happen? And if we do this, what's going to happen? So again, going back to that other statement, how do we break down those barriers to say, it's not about what's going to happen, it's about what are we going to do? Instead of leaning on our heels, we've got to lean on our toes. And how are we going to work together? And how are we going to find the best of our country and then have it be as centered as we're able out of Detroit?
Great. Looking at what I could see from behind, the number of portfolio companies that you've invested in, which one are you most excited about?
All my babies are beautiful. I think that when you think about trends, and I'm in a firm like ours, you sit on certain boards, you're closer to other companies and others, and there's two companies I sit on the board of that I'm incredibly excited about. And I think they're actually very pertinent to this group. One is Nutonomy. This is an MIT-based team focused on the software stack for autonomy. If you read or if you've studied virtual reality, many times you put on those goggles, you put on that headset, and it's very disconcerting. There's a lot of motion sickness. The same thing happens with autonomy. How do you make sure that you're giving a customer, a passenger, a delightful experience, something that's human-like? What Nutonomy has done is exactly that. They're providing kind of a refined and a continually refined algorithm which gives you a human-like experience going from point to point, and also doing so with an amount of sensor fusion, which all these companies are doing in autonomy, which gives tremendous data and safety to the vehicle. So I love what they're doing. They're deployed in Singapore. The amount of attention that we are getting from OEMs, Tier 1s, as it relates to how that team and technology can fit into their business, amazing. And the other one is Karumba Security, relatively new investment, our first Israeli investment. But this is a very seasoned team, a team in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that is focused on how do we actually protect each individual ECU within the vehicle from a cyber attack perspective. Taking their experience in 8100, one of the premier Israeli kind of cyber and SIGINT groups, and kind of bringing that in. Executives from Checkpoint, one of the largest enterprise security companies in the world. But the importance, as I said before, of what they're doing when it comes to connected and autonomous cars, they have to be secure. And as we've seen time and time again, they're currently not. So that's going to be a really exciting, I think, story as it plays out.
That's great.
But they're all wonderful. They're all very beautiful babies.
That's very exciting. I just wanted to open up. We have just a couple minutes. Is there any questions in the audience for Chris before we move on? Yeah.
Thank you. You as well.
Are you guys looking at deals where there's aftermarket autonomy providers, retrofitting existing non-autonomous products? Are you looking at that?
We are. And really quickly on that point, I think you have to think about friction as it relates to on-install or aftermarket. And are you getting it at the factory or is it coming later? And then what is the consumer demand as to the the provisioning of that product. But I mean, that's what Cruise was. Cruise was an aftermarket solution that's being brought in to be an app design. I think that's exactly what's going to happen with autonomy, whether it be with a large syndicate or whether it be with an individual technology or OEM provider. But we're looking across the entire ecosystem.
And the other question I had is, I've spent some time in the 3D printing as well. And if there is a threat to mobility, it might be 3D printing. Where you don't actually have to move the goods.
Yeah.
You move different materials. And I was just wondering if you guys are thinking along those lines.
It's interesting.
It's a great question, and it's something we've thought a lot about. Not only is it I don't know if I'd agree that it's a threat to mobility, because I think you're still going to have kind of going back to your French video, which was great, you're going to have that last mile intertwine. You're going to need to, you're going to have those things kind of delivered in different respects, and people are still going to need to go to from A to B. But I think 3D printing is a huge threat to Detroit. What are the bricks in our fortress wall? What are the things that we own that no one else does? It's our tooling base, it's our machinery base, it's our industrial base. If I can set up a manufacturing facility at 1/100th of the cost of the kit build-up, how much of a competitive advantage do we have here in Detroit? The answer is not much. So you look at companies like Local Motors and how they're continuing to deploy. Fantastic company. We need to either be partnering, competing, or figuring out how we're going to beat them. But I do think I believe strongly 3D printing is going to be a big part of mobility on a forward-going basis.
Great. Got time for one more question there. Larry?
I guess it's a two-part question. I had a meeting with Hal Washington at Ford in terms of advanced engineering design. And when you mentioned you're 10 years away, theoretically, from this local market, what does that mean in terms of break-even to the three major car companies to do that? And secondly, he said their own software and sensors are being within, their goal is to be within 2 centimeters distance. And so how close are we to that?
Great question. This is a great example of when I throw out numbers, it gets me in trouble. So I don't know if we're exactly 10 years away, but I think that to your point, how do you validate this type of investment in order for something on the come, for a revenue that's down the road that can be a systemic deployment of some sort? So I think that the way that we think about this is, and let me back up a little bit. Before today, if you talk to most people in the industry, they would say that true level 4 autonomy, level 5 autonomy would be at production and deployment in 2022, 2025. Elon Musk today announced they will have and will be producing a full level 4, level 5 autonomous vehicle. The only constraint is regulatory environment in terms of how it can deploy. So the speed of innovation is now, and whether you believe Elon or not, and you can look at his track record for hitting timeline on talking points. I'll leave that to you. I think that the speed of innovation is speeding up in a big way. So when it comes to how these mobility solutions are going to deploy, I think that what we've seen from GM with Maven, which is their kind of competitor from a SaaS mass perspective, that is the tip of the iceberg as to what we're going to start seeing deployed from these OEMs. Ford's acquisition of Chariot's a good example. Currently a 6 to 8 passenger Transit Connect, driven by an individual, providing algorithmic pickups and drop-offs that optimize a vehicle going point to point, the people in between. We're going to see that from an autonomous perspective in a big way, and you just look at the basic numbers, incredibly profitable. So I think all those things are ones that are coming together that will provide revenue in the near term. It's going to come back to how do you get the right people, and how do you man the programs that are going to drive that type of value for the company. You do the same thing Eisenhower did in terms of build. In the 1950s, as a young lieutenant at Fort Meade, Maryland, I had an exhibition across the United States to drive U.S. military support to the West Coast. Awful, awful. Our roadways made no sense as a modern power. He built the interstate highway system, which was built for, many people don't really focus on this, for the transfer of military assets around our country in the event of invasion on one coast or the other. He did that through force of will and need. We must do that with autonomy. We can't have a balkanized group in which we have all these states with different rules. I think the DOT just came out with actually exactly that. I think we're going to see a national mandate. We have to be focused on safety first and foremost, and we have to be focused on our people. I mean, one of the other comments, this is not just a business. Like we invest in great companies, but what I love about my job is the second and third order effects of what I do are to reduce congestion. are to save lives, are to give people access to transportation that don't have access on the east and west side of my city right now. I love what my companies do. So when we think about deploying this type of technology, it's fine to be bureaucratic, just a little, to make sure that we are doing the right thing by our people, but we have to think about the benefits that come from them, and the benefits to the next generation mobility, and the benefits that we can derive here in Detroit if we grab onto it with both hands are tremendous.
Great. Some exciting, really, really exciting, the future of what's going to happen, not only autonomous vehicles, but mobility. But finally, we wanted to conclude our program with, if you remember, for those that were with us last year, we recognized Veronica Scott and the Empowerment Plan and what she's done in Detroit. You know, this year, I mean, you can see Chris's passion, but it's he's the real deal here with what he's doing with Read to a Child. So I'd like to bring him up, and would you like David?
Yeah, if Dave Walker and Kai Lindberg, if you guys are here, please come up.
They're both here. Come on up, and we'll give you a little more insight into Read to a Child, and I think you have a video too.
We do, and I know everyone is on the way out after this, but I'd ask you to stay if you could. This is one of the most important things I've ever worked on. What you're about to see.
It's the best thing I do with my lunch hour once a week. I wish it lasted all year long. I wish it didn't end when school ended.
You know, in business, sometimes you have prospects or clients who beat you up or things don't go the way you want it to go. And then you go into a school district and see a child happy to see you, and it just changes your mood for the day.
Our mission really is to get every child across America someone reading to them on a regular basis, exposing them to vocabulary and background knowledge, increasing the chances that they're going to be successful in reading.
The growth is where they're not sitting there kind of mad that they have to read independently, but they're actually enjoying it. So the attitude that they're having towards reading has changed.
There's a lot going on in school. It's go, go, go. It's 6 hours, and we cram as much as we can into that 6 hours, and so to have them, you know, just have that time to relax with a good book over lunch is so special.
What's different about Read to a Child is we're focused on adults reading to a child consistently, which studies have shown is the single biggest thing you can do to help a child succeed in reading on their own.
The employees get involved, they feel a part of the community, they go read to these adorable students, and they come back really rejuvenated.
One of the great things about the program is that it's easy to do. You essentially need to show up and read. All the logistics are taken care of, the school management.
To get involved, take the pledge to read to a child in your life, and then support our efforts to provide reading mentors to children who don't have someone reading to them on a regular basis.
So I'm very quickly going to say a couple things and turn it over to two people who are, frankly, much more important when it comes to what we're doing in Detroit. But by way of background, I'm the first in my family ever to go to college. And I was able to do that because I had great parents who asked me outlandish questions like, where do you want to go to college? When no one knew what that was. And the reason I could compete against these East and West Coast types, the reason a working class kid can be up here and tell you the story I told you just before this, was because I had the same tools in the toolbox. And the most important tool in that toolbox is literacy. So I was a reader when I was in graduate school at Yale to young kids in the New Haven area, had a chance to see the impact on just this one-on-one mentorship. They asked me to join the board upon graduation. I said, I'll do it on one condition, that we come to Detroit. They had grown organically on the East Coast in terms of where they were founded, but Detroit was a city which was in dire need of this. And we obviously have lots of different ways to engage literacy in Detroit. We have a 50% adult, functionally illiterate rate here in our city. But for me, it's like, where do we start to make real change? And where are the people that need those tools in the toolbox? And it's our kids. It's our kids in the east and west side of the city, and all over it, but on the east and west side especially. So this is a program that matches tremendous companies and their employees with kids around the cities in which they operate to provide them on one-on-one mentorship. And I can tell you the benefit to the kids is tremendous, but the benefit to you as a reader, to your employees as a reader, when you think about communal engagement, when you think about volunteerism, when you think about having an impact on not just our future employees, but our future employers, our mayors, our governors, our presidents. God knows we need one of these kids to be running for president this year. Let's try to focus on that. So that's why I focused on it. Again, I can spin on this all day long, but let me turn it over to Dave, who's our chairman in Detroit, Kai, who's our director in Detroit, and please, guys.
Thanks, everyone. My name is David Walker, and who doesn't remember the favorite book that they were read to by their parents growing up? So for me, it was Ferdinand the Bull and Are You My Mother? And reading at home was really, really helpful to, everything I've done in life. So I ran into Chris 3 years ago, and he told me the story the first time we met about Read to a Child, and I was instantly hooked. I'm the CFO at Level 1 Bank, and we're out in Farmington Hills. But he was just so passionate about it, I immediately became a reader for the program at Bow Elementary out in northwest Detroit. And I've had the same child, Chris Dorsey, for 3 years, and now he's a 4th grader. And so he's moved on. And I have a new student starting next week, Zaire, that I'll be meeting with for the first time. He's a 1st grader next week when we start the program. So I got the bank involved. We've donated money. We have 6 different people at the bank that read every week. And we found it to be an incredibly successful program. And there's no question that when children are sort of 6 to 10 years old, that's when they decide to either read or not. And a lot of these children just don't have anyone at home reading, and they lose interest. And so you need to have that adult continually to read to them. And so doing it once a week, week after week, to the same child one-on-one has been very, very helpful. And we just recently hired a new director in the Detroit program, Kai Lindberg, and I'd like her to say a few words. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And Chris and Dave did an amazing job kind of painting the picture of what our program is all about. It's really that simple, reading to a kid. Growing up, my mother, she had a 6th grade education, and unfortunately, I didn't have those tools in my toolbox. So it was because of community-minded leaders like Chris and Dave and many people in this room that gave me the opportunity to enjoy some of the successes that I have in my career. I've worked for the government. I mean, I've led some pretty significant marketing companies in the past, and I was in a position now where I'm the mother of 2 beautiful, beautiful little boys, and I read Chicka Chicka Boom Boom to them almost every other night, and they get extremely excited about my animation, and hopefully that will infiltrate them as they begin to grow up and have a love for reading, and reading not become a chore, and that's really the core of our program. It's wonderful tutoring mechanisms out here. Our teachers are working extremely hard to make sure that our children have those mechanisms that they need to be successful. But we also want to couple that with excitement about reading, with all of the wonderful advances in technology. I mean, my 14-year-old, he's reading the Odyssey right now, and it's probably one of the most difficult things he's ever done in his life. But we approach it in a very fun and energetic way so that he will not only retain the knowledge, but also use that as he starts to build himself as a professional. It's not just instant gratification anymore, Jaywan. You really need to slow down and understand and digest what you're doing and enjoy doing it. So what I would ask each of you to just strongly consider, we have a volunteer need of about 72 leaders at 3 different sites, and I've been talking to several foundations and several schools in the 6 weeks that I've been on staff about how they can use our program and how much need there is out there. So please just consider doing it. I'm more than happy to stay after and talk to you about specific ways that you can support us, and there's information in your packets as well, but we truly appreciate the continued support of UHY and people like Chris and Dave, and I thank you for your time.
Lastly, we wanted to obviously recognize Read to a Child and everything Chris and Dave and Lynn have done. We wanted to present them with a check for help go towards Read to a Child. We probably should get a little smaller one. $2,500 for their cause. What's that?
Sure.
Smallest one in the group here.
Dave, we can deposit this at level 1, right? All right, good.
Check is in the mail.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, UHY.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Well, we made it. That concludes our presentation for this year. Again, I would like to thank everybody for coming out, and I hope it was really informational and learned a lot. Thanks so much. We'll be here for a few minutes. If you need to chat with any of us, come on up. But again, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.